She knocked on his door at midnight, not to confess love, not to ask for money, not to deliver good news. She knocked because his wife had stopped wanting to live. Lucas Bennett had spent 11 months and $43 million trying to keep Eleanor alive. He hired the best oncologists in 3 countries. He bought a private floor at the hospital. He researched every clinical trial, every experimental drug, every prayer wrapped in science. But while he was busy fighting the disease, nobody was fighting for her will to survive. And the woman standing outside his door at midnight was the only one who noticed. Like this video, drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story has traveled. The clock on the nightstand read 12:07 a.m. when the knocking started. 3 sounds. Quiet, almost hesitant, like whoever stood on the other side wasn't entirely sure they should be there. Lucas Bennett lay on top of the hotel bedspread, still fully dressed, one arm draped over his eyes, shoes still on, the soft crash of ocean waves coming through the cracked balcony door, doing absolutely nothing to help him sleep. He'd been staring at the ceiling for 3 hours. The room was a junior suite on the 6th floor of the Meridian Coast Resort, a place his assistant had booked because the brochure promised restorative sea air and therapeutic tranquility, 2 things Lucas no longer believed existed. The resort was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, deliberate, polished, slightly hollow. Ocean view balconies, thread count sheets, a minibar stocked with whiskey he hadn't touched because drinking alone felt too much like admitting something. Eleanor was sleeping in the adjoining room, or at least she was supposed to be sleeping. The door between their rooms had been closed since 9, and he hadn't heard her move. He'd been listening. The knocking came again, same rhythm, 3 quiet taps. Lucas sat up slowly, rubbing his face with both hands. He was 32 years old and looked 45 right now, not in the way that sounds flattering when people say someone looks distinguished, but in the way that a person looks when they've been quietly falling apart for almost a year and haven't told anyone. His jaw carried several days of stubble he kept meaning to shave. His eyes were the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. He crossed the room and opened the door. Mia Harper stood in the hallway. She was 30 years old, though she looked younger standing there in an oversized gray hoodie and jeans, hair pulled back loosely, the way a person looks when they got dressed in the dark and didn't think twice about it. Her face was pale under the dim corridor lighting. Not sickly pale, but the pale of someone who'd been crying recently and was trying very hard to look like they hadn't been. Her eyes gave her away. They were red around the edges. Lucas stared at her for a second. "Mia." His voice was flat with exhaustion. "It's after midnight." "I know." She didn't apologize for it. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. He'd met Mia 7 months ago in the waiting room of the oncology center where Eleanor received her first round of chemotherapy. She'd been there visiting a patient of her own, a regular customer from the diner where she waitressed 3 days a week, an elderly man who had no family left to sit with him. That was just the kind of person Mia Harper was, though it had taken Lucas some time to understand that. You don't immediately trust a waitress who starts spending significant time with your sick wife. His first instinct had been mild suspicion. His second instinct, after actually watching her with Eleanor, had been something close to gratitude mixed with shame. She and Eleanor had become genuinely close. The kind of close that happens fast between people who don't have the energy anymore for anything that isn't real. "Is she okay?" Lucas asked immediately, straightening. "Is Eleanor—" "She's physically fine." Mia said it quickly before he could spiral. "She's sleeping. I checked 20 minutes ago." He relaxed slightly, though his body stayed tense in that chronic way it had been for months, muscles ready to receive bad news all the time, even when there wasn't any. He'd started doing it so automatically he forgot it wasn't normal. "Then what?" "Come to the pool with me." He looked at her like she'd said something in a foreign language. "The pool?" "Yes." "Mia, it's midnight." "I know what time it is, Lucas." She said his name firmly, and something in her tone, something controlled and deliberate, made him stop trying to redirect her. She wasn't here because she couldn't sleep. She wasn't here to make small talk by the water. Whatever had brought her to his door at this hour was sitting right behind her eyes, and it was serious. He grabbed his room key from the dresser and followed her without asking anything else. The resort corridors at midnight had a particular atmosphere, the artificial cheerfulness of the decor stripped of its daytime purpose. The light, a little too yellow, the carpet patterns a little too loud for the silence. Their footsteps didn't echo so much as get absorbed. They passed the ice machine, a luggage cart left outside someone's door, a room service tray with a half-eaten club sandwich. Neither of them spoke. Lucas watched Mia walk ahead of him, shoulders slightly hunched, arms crossed over her middle, the posture of a person trying to hold themselves together. He'd learned to read people the way you do when you spend enough time in hospital waiting rooms. You start to notice what people's bodies say when their mouths aren't saying anything. She was scared, not panicked, not dramatic, but genuinely, quietly scared in the way that made his stomach pull tight. They pushed through the glass doors at the end of the corridor, and the warm night air came at them immediately, thick with salt and the low hum of insects. The pool area was empty, the water lit from beneath, casting moving blue light across the surrounding deck. Palm trees stood along the perimeter, their fronds catching some invisible wind that didn't reach the ground. Beyond them, the ocean was a dark mass with a silver line where the moon touched it. Mia walked to the edge of the pool and sat down, not on a lounge chair. On the concrete deck, legs folded like she needed to be close to the ground. Lucas sat beside her, not too close. He'd learned to give her space. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The water moved gently in front of them, the light rippling. "There's something I should have told you 2 weeks ago," Mia said. He didn't answer. He had learned that some things needed the silence to exist in before they could be said. "Eleanor told me something." She was staring at the water. "In the hospital, during that last round of testing, when you'd stepped out to take the phone call from Dr. Voss." She paused, pressing her lips together. "She made me promise not to tell you." He felt the familiar thing again. That readiness. That low, terrible readiness his body had developed for the worst possible sentence. "Tell me," he said. Mia turned to look at him then, and he saw how much it had cost her to carry this for 2 weeks. The sleeplessness of it was written on her face. "She thinks she's becoming a burden," Mia said. "To you, to Sophie, to everyone." She stopped, swallowed. "She told me she's been wondering whether everyone around her would eventually be better off." The words landed differently than Lucas expected. Not like a punch, more like a slow thing, like a weight pressing down on his chest from the inside. He didn't say anything. "She wasn't dramatic about it," Mia continued, her voice careful and low. "That's what scared me most. She wasn't crying or spiraling. She was just calm. The way someone sounds when they've been sitting with a thought long enough that it stops feeling extreme and starts feeling like logic." She shook her head slightly. "And I kept thinking I should tell you. I almost called you 4 times, but she'd asked me not to, and I—" She exhaled. "I'm not someone who breaks promises easily." "Why now?" Lucas asked. His voice came out flatter than he intended. "Because today, when I went to check on her after dinner, she was sitting on the balcony in the dark. Just sitting there, alone, not reading, not on her phone, just staring at the water." Mia pressed her palms against the concrete deck. "And she looked finished, not sad, not angry, just done with something. And it scared me more than any of the other times." Lucas stared at the pool. The thing about fear is that it changes shape depending on what it's protecting. For 11 months, his fear had been functional. It drove action. It made calls, researched treatments, flew to consultations, hired specialists, built the scaffolding of a fight. It was fear that moved, that did things, that converted itself into forward motion because that was the only version of fear he knew how to tolerate. This was different. This was the kind of fear that has no action attached to it. The kind that tells you all the things you didn't do, all the things you missed while you were busy doing the other things. He'd been so focused on keeping Eleanor alive that he'd forgotten to make sure she wanted to stay. "Lucas?" Mia's voice was gentle. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel like you did something wrong. I know. I'm telling you because I know why you're telling me." He ran a hand through his hair. "I know." She gave him a moment. The palm trees moved overhead, and somewhere past the pool fence, a wave broke. "She used to do this thing," Mia said then, her voice shifting. "Softer now." And something in it suggested she'd been thinking about this for a while. "When we talked about it, about feeling overwhelmed or lost or like life was too much, she'd always come back to the same kind of image. Water. She gestured at the pool. She told me once that when she was in college, before everything got complicated, she used to sit beside a public pool near her apartment when she needed to think. She said there was something about the way water moved, just constantly, without stopping, that made her feel like things could keep going even when she couldn't imagine how. Lucas turned to look at her. She sat there and she'd think about what she actually wanted, Mia continued, not what the world expected from her, not what was practical, what she wanted. She wanted to be a teacher. She wanted a real family, not the performative kind, but the actual messy kind. And she wanted to help people feel less alone. Those three things. She said they were the three stars she navigated by. He remembered. Vaguely, distantly, early in their relationship, before business had started consuming everything. Eleanor had told him something like that. Not in those exact words, but the shape of it was familiar, like a photograph he'd put in a drawer and forgotten. She made me promise something, Mia said. A long time ago, before she got sick even. She made me promise that if she ever got lost, if fear ever got its hands around her and started convincing her that she didn't matter, someone had to remind her, not with platitudes, not with "you're so strong" or "think positive," but with actual evidence. She looked at him. With the real proof of who she is. Lucas was quiet for a long time. The water shimmered. Something clicked in the resort machinery somewhere. The hum of a generator, maybe, or the pool filtration system cycling. "How do we do that?" he finally asked. And Mia Harper, who had been carrying this plan inside her chest for 2 weeks, told him. They talked until nearly 3 in the morning. Lucas hadn't pulled an all-nighter for anything other than work in years. This was different. He wasn't tracking market shifts or reviewing acquisition documents. He was sitting on a pool deck with a 30-year-old waitress, making a list of every person Eleanor had ever touched deeply enough that they might still carry the impression. It was a longer list than he expected. That said something. Former students first, Mia said, sitting cross-legged now, a notepad she'd produced from the front pocket of her hoodie spread across her knee. The pen she was using had the resort logo on it. She'd grabbed it from the check-in desk on their way through the lobby, practical in the way people are when they're used to making do. She taught middle school English for 6 years before Sophie was born. 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. That's a lot of kids. I wouldn't know how to find them, Lucas said. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees, staring at the paper with the focused expression of a man trying to translate grief into logistics. It was what he did. He converted things. I can have my assistant pull records from the school district, but that'll take time. I can find them faster. Mia said it without arrogance, just the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who grew up with limited resources and learned that the internet will tell you almost anything if you ask the right way. Give me a laptop in a couple hours and I'll have you names and contact info for at least 40 of them. Facebook groups for old school classes are remarkably active. She tapped the pen against her notepad. Who else? Neighbors. She grew up in Millhaven, Connecticut. Her parents still live there. They know everyone on the block. And she was close with the family across the street, the Delgados. Their daughter had some kind of accident, I think, years ago. Car accident, Ava Delgado. Eleanor sat with the family at the hospital for 4 days straight. She told me. Mia wrote the name. Who else? Her coworkers from before. She stayed in touch with some of them. There's a woman named Patricia Crane, I think. Elementary school vice principal. She and Eleanor were close when she was teaching. He was reaching back through years of half-heard conversations, names mentioned over dinner, stories she'd told him when they were first dating, and he'd actually been paying attention. He felt a small, quiet shame about how much he'd half-heard. And her college roommate. I don't remember her name. Donna Reardon, she's in Portland now. I have her number. Eleanor gave it to me. She added it to the list. Okay, here's what I'm thinking. The plan, as Mia outlined it, was direct. Video messages. People who knew Eleanor, people she'd helped or inspired or simply shown up for, recording short videos, 2-3 minutes each, talking about the specific moment when Eleanor had mattered to them. Not general warmth, not she was such a lovely person. Specific moments, specific words she'd said, specific things she'd done, the concrete evidence of impact. And then we show them to her, Mia said. Not tomorrow morning. We don't have the videos yet. We need at least 24 hours to collect them, maybe 36. She looked at him with the steady directness of someone who had already thought this through multiple times. Can you keep her here that long? Is there something you can tell her about why you're staying an extra day? I'll figure it out. He'd been saying that phrase for 11 months. At least this time it felt like it might mean something. And Lucas. She said his name with a particular care, like she was about to say something that required the right container. When we show these to her, you can't just be the logistics person. You can't stand at the back and organize. You have to sit beside her. He looked at her. I know you know how to fight for her, Mia said. I've watched you fight for 11 months, but she doesn't need someone to fight for her right now. She needs someone to sit with her. She paused. Those are different things. Lucas didn't answer immediately. He had the look of a person absorbing something that is simple to say and complicated to receive. Okay, he said finally. I know. Do you? He held her gaze. I'm trying to. Mia studied him for a moment, then seemed to decide that was enough. She looked back down at the notepad. Then let's make a list. Lucas woke up at 6:15 with 2 hours of sleep and something unfamiliar in his chest that took him a moment to identify. Purpose. Specific, directed, not about money purpose. He'd been running on a different kind of purpose for almost a year. The kind that says keep her alive, make calls, find solutions, move faster. That kind of purpose had the texture of running on concrete. This felt different, softer, like he was finally standing on the right piece of ground. He showered, changed, and knocked gently on the adjoining door. Come in. Eleanor's voice was quiet, already awake. She was sitting up in bed with a cup of coffee from the room service tray, looking out at the ocean through the gauze curtains. She was 41 years old and had the delicate appearance that serious illness gives people. Not fragile exactly, but light, like something essential had been redistributed. Her hair, which had grown back and softer and slightly different than before, was loose around her face. She was wearing a white cotton robe that was slightly too big for her. She looked at him when he came in. Her eyes were clear, not the red and swollen he'd braced for, just quiet, in the way eyes get when someone has been alone with their thoughts for long enough. You were out late, she said. Not accusatory, just noting. Couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of her bed, which he didn't usually do. They'd gotten into a pattern of a certain careful distance, the kind that develops between people when one of them is sick and the other one is scared of breaking something. He sat close to her now. How are you feeling? She considered the question with the honesty she'd developed over months of being asked it by doctors and nurses and well-meaning acquaintances. She didn't do the reflexive, I'm fine, anymore. Tired, she said. Not the physical kind. The other kind. He nodded. He didn't say, I know, it'll get better. Stay positive. He just nodded, and she seemed to register that he'd heard her. I want to stay one more day, he said. I moved some things around. We don't have to leave tomorrow morning. We can go Tuesday. He watched her face for resistance. The ocean's good for you. Dr. Voss said rest. She turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. What about your meetings? I moved them. She looked at him, mildly skeptical. She knew what his calendar typically looked like, and she knew what it meant when he rearranged it. But the skepticism softened. Okay, she said, one more day. By 8 a.m., Lucas was on the phone with his assistant, James, who had the particular talent of executing unusual requests without audible judgment. I need you to track down former students of Eleanor Bennett. She taught at Whitmore Middle School in Millhaven, Connecticut, from 2008 to 2014, Lucas said, standing on his balcony with his second coffee. Cross-reference the school's alumni pages, local Facebook groups, any directory you can access. I need contact information. Email, phone, anything. By noon. A brief pause. Should I explain why I'm reaching out, or I'll handle the outreach personally, just the list? Understood. Noon. He hung up and texted Mia. Starting on my end, James is pulling the school records. What do you have so far? She responded in under a minute. Already in 3 alumni Facebook groups from Whitmore. Found 17 students who mentioned Mrs. Bennett by name in old posts. Sending you a list in the next hour. Also tracked down Donna Reardon and Patricia Crane. Both answered on the first call. Both cried. He read the last sentence twice. Both cried. He put the phone down and looked at the ocean for a long moment. He'd known Eleanor for 9 years. He'd been in love with her for most of them. He knew she was kind. Of course he knew that. But kindness had become background information somewhere along the way the sound of traffic becomes invisible to people who live near a highway. It's still there. You've just stopped actually hearing it. He picked the phone back up and dialed Patricia Crane. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and slightly out of breath like she'd been in the middle of something. "Mr. Bennett, your friend Mia called me this morning. I've been hoping you'd call." "Patricia, thank you for picking up." He didn't do small talk well, especially not right now. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. What did Eleanor do for you? Specifically. Not generally. Specifically." A pause on the line. Then Patricia Crane exhaled, and in that exhale was the weight of something she'd been carrying for a while. "In the fall of 2013, she said, I was going to resign. I'd had a parent complaint that turned into a board investigation, completely fabricated, but it went on for months and it gutted me. I'd been in education for 18 years and I was ready to walk away from all of it." She paused. "Eleanor drove to my house on a Friday night with a casserole I hadn't asked for and sat at my kitchen table with me until 11 o'clock. She didn't tell me what to do. She didn't give me a pep talk. She just kept asking me questions about why I'd started teaching in the first place, what the first year felt like, the students I'd remembered for the right reasons." Another pause. "By the time she left, I'd talked myself back into it. I don't know how she did that. I think she just knew the right questions." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "Can you tell me that story on camera?" "Mr. Bennett, I'd tell that story anywhere you wanted." By noon, the list had grown to 41 names. By 2 in the afternoon, 23 people had confirmed they would record a video message. By 4 o'clock, videos had started arriving. Short clips sent via email, phone, whatever method was easiest for each person. Lucas sat at the small desk in his hotel room with his laptop open, watching each one as it came in, taking notes so he could tell Mia which ones were strongest, which needed a follow-up call to get more specific detail, which were so good they needed to be placed early in the sequence so Eleanor wouldn't be completely overwhelmed before she'd seen everything. He didn't make it through the third video without his jaw tightening. The third video was from a 24-year-old woman named Cassandra Webb, who had been in Eleanor's 7th grade English class 12 years ago. She'd recorded it in what appeared to be a car parked outside somewhere, the afternoon light coming through the windshield at an angle that made everything slightly golden. She was crying before she'd said 30 words. "I don't know if Mrs. Bennett would even remember me," Cassandra said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I was kind of invisible back then. I never raised my hand. I ate lunch alone mostly, and in the middle of the year my parents were splitting up, and I wrote this paper. We were supposed to write about a place that mattered to us, and I wrote about my grandmother's kitchen, and I was embarrassed about it after I turned it in because everyone else wrote about, like, Disney World or whatever." She laughed a little through the tears, and Mrs. Bennett handed it back with this note. Just a little note at the bottom, and she'd underlined the part about my grandmother's hands, the part about the smell of the kitchen, and the note said, "I still have it. I kept it." It said, "This is exactly what good writing feels like. Don't ever let anyone talk you out of this voice." Lucas sat very still. "I'm a published author now," Cassandra said. "I wrote a book last year. And in the acknowledgments, I thanked a 7th grade teacher whose name I almost didn't put because I wasn't sure she'd remember me. She wiped her face again. She changed my life with 9 words, and I'm not sure she ever knew." Lucas closed his laptop. He sat in the quiet of the hotel room with the ocean sound coming through the window, and he just sat there for a minute. 9 words. He tried to remember the last time he'd said 9 words to Eleanor that were worth keeping. Mia knocked on his door at 6 with a problem. "Donna Reardon can't get her camera to work," she said, walking in without waiting to be invited, which was very Mia. "She's trying to record on her laptop and the video keeps cutting out. Her internet connection is bad and she's panicking." She was holding her own phone, apparently mid-text thread with Donna. Also, one of the students, Thomas Aiken, the one who said Eleanor talked him out of dropping out of high school. He sent his video, but it's 10 minutes long and he cries for most of it. So we need to figure out if we're using the whole thing or editing it down. "Edit it," Lucas said, turning from the desk. "What equipment do we have for editing?" "Nothing. We have hotel Wi-Fi and our phones." He stood up. "Call James." He was already reaching for his own phone. Tell him I need a video editor in this building by tomorrow morning and whatever equipment they need. Money is not a constraint. Mia was already dialing. I'll also tell him we need a projector, a screen, and a room with an ocean view. She paused. What do you want to call it? Call what? The room, when we set it up. I want it to feel like something intentional, not like an ambush. She looked at him. Eleanor doesn't like being surprised in ways that take away her agency. She's told me. He thought about it. Call it what it is. We're just going to tell her we want to show her something. We're not going to pretend it's a business meeting. She'll be suspicious. Probably. But she'll come. He looked at Mia. She trusts you. Mia held his gaze for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read, something between gratitude and the weight of responsibility. She trusts both of us, Mia said. Don't undersell that. He almost said something back. Instead, he just nodded. At 7 p.m., Lucas made the mistake of going to check on Eleanor and finding her on the balcony with her journal. Eleanor had kept a journal since she was 14. It was one of the things he knew about her that most people didn't. Not a diary, not event recording, but an actual running correspondence with herself. She wrote in it when things were too complicated to say out loud. When he'd found her on the balcony holding it, her knees drawn up to her chest, her handwriting small and deliberate on the open page, he'd had the specific sensation of seeing something he wasn't supposed to see. Not because she was hiding it, but because the moment had the quality of privacy. The privacy of a person deciding something. He sat down in the chair beside her. She looked up, put the journal face down on her knee. I was just writing, she said. I know. He looked out at the ocean. The sun was going down, enormous and slow, the way it does near water, painting the whole sky in shades that had no names. What do you think about when you're out here? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. He could feel her deciding how much to answer. About whether I'm the same person I was, she said. About whether illness changes you or reveals you. I can't figure out which one. He turned to look at her. Her profile was lit by the last of the sunset. The line of her jaw, the particular way she held her chin when she was being honest. What do you think? He asked. She considered it. I think it does both. I think being sick strips away things you were using as armor, and you find out whether you like what's underneath. A pause. I'm not sure I do, lately. Eleanor. I'm not saying it to upset you, she said quickly, and the quickness of it, the reflex to protect him even now, made something ache in him. I'm just being honest. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Yeah. He leaned his elbows on the railing, looking out at the darkening water. We are. He made a decision. I have something I want to show you tomorrow, something Mia and I have been working on. She looked at him. What kind of something? The kind that's worth seeing. He turned to face her fully. Will you trust me for one more day? She studied him, the way she'd always been able to study him, like she could read something in the specific way he was holding himself that told her more than his words. Whatever she saw there, it seemed to be enough. One more day, she said. After Eleanor went to bed, Lucas sat alone at the desk and watched the remaining videos. He watched a 60-year-old man named Frank Okafor, a neighbor from Eleanor's childhood street who had lost his wife the year Eleanor graduated from college, describe the way she used to sit with his kids when he was at the funeral home making arrangements, how she made grilled cheese sandwiches and played board games with them, and never once made the grief feel like something to be managed. How his youngest daughter, who was 8 at the time, had called Eleanor her extra mom for a year afterward. He watched a young man named Marcus, now 26, who had been in Eleanor's 8th grade English class during what he described flatly as the worst year of my life. He didn't elaborate on what made it the worst year. He just said that Mrs. Bennett had let him stay in her classroom during lunch for 3 weeks without asking him why he needed to be there. He said she'd let him sit in the back and read while she graded papers, and that she'd never once tried to process him, or fix him, or turn his pain into a teachable moment. She just let me be somewhere safe, Marcus said. I needed somewhere safe, and she gave me one without making a whole thing about it. He watched Patricia Crane's video, which was 2 minutes and 40 seconds long and used the word gratitude 3 times, and in which she cried in a dignified and restrained way, and then laughed at herself for crying, and then cried again. He watched 12 videos before he stopped. Not because there weren't more, there were more. But because by the 12th one, he was sitting at a hotel desk at 11:30 at night, and his face was wet, and he was thinking about something he hadn't let himself think about clearly for a long time. He was thinking about how badly he wanted his wife to still be here next year. Not abstractly, not as a concept or a goal. Specifically, he wanted to sit across from her at a table and hear her opinions about things. He wanted to watch her read. She always held books slightly too close to her face, a habit that had nothing to do with her vision. He wanted to disagree with her about movies, which they did regularly and loudly and without resolution. He wanted to hear her teach Sophie something because Eleanor taught the way she always had, sideways, through stories and questions rather than instructions. He wanted all of it, the specific, ordinary, unremarkable, all of it. He texted Mia. "How many videos total?" She replied, 27 confirmed. 3 more coming in tonight. Maybe 30 by morning. He looked at the number. 30 people, he thought. 30 people whose lives are different because Eleanor Bennett existed in them. He typed back. "How do we order them?" Mia sent a voice memo instead of a text, her voice low and tired and thinking out loud, the way she did when she was working something through. "I think we start slow, something simple, something that isn't dramatic on its face, just specific and true. Then we build. We don't start with the big emotional ones because she'll shut down before she can receive them. We need her to already believe, a little, before she sees the ones that are going to hit hardest." A pause. "And I think you should introduce it. Not me, you. Because the point isn't that other people love her. She already knows that, even if she's forgotten. The point is that you see her, that you're not just her caretaker or her medical coordinator, that you still see the actual her." He listened to the memo twice. Then he turned the desk lamp off and sat in the dark for a while, with the sound of the ocean coming in through the window. You still see the actual her. He needed to figure out whether that was true. More honestly, he needed to figure out what it meant for it to be true. Because he'd been looking at Eleanor for 11 months, looking at her blood work, her scan results, her side effects, the dark circles under her eyes, the weight she'd lost, the way she moved when she was in pain, and he'd convinced himself that constant vigilance was the same as attention. It wasn't. Vigilance watches for threat. Attention sees a person. He hadn't seen her, not really, not in a long time. He sat there until almost 1 in the morning, and when he finally went to bed, it wasn't to sleep. It was to rehearse, silently, everything he needed to say to her tomorrow. The video editor James had located was a 28-year-old freelancer named Derek, who drove down from the city at 6 a.m. and arrived at the resort with a laptop bag and a quiet, professional air and the ability to process 30 separate video files before noon. Lucas liked him immediately, the way you like anyone who is very good at something and doesn't feel the need to talk about it. By 10 a.m., the conference room on the second floor had been transformed. It wasn't elaborate. That wasn't the point. The hotel staff had set up a small projector screen against the ocean-facing wall, with the actual ocean visible through the glass behind it. The screen in the foreground, the real water behind it, so that wherever Eleanor looked, there was water. The chairs, just 2, because this wasn't an audience event, were placed side by side facing the screen, close enough that arms could touch. The overhead lights were dimmed. Someone had brought in small potted plants from somewhere, white orchids that had been in the lobby, and placed them along the windowsill. Whether that had been Mia or one of the staff, Lucas didn't ask. It was the right call either way. Mia came by at 10:30 to look at the room. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. "It's good," she said. "Derek did most of it." The orchids weren't Derek. She came in and adjusted one of the chairs slightly, perhaps a centimeter, barely perceptible. She had the quality of a person who notices things that are almost right and can't leave them that way. "How are you?" Lucas asked. She turned to look at him, slightly surprised by the question. He didn't usually ask. "Nervous," she said. "What if it's too much and she shuts down? What if she gets angry that we went behind her back? What if she—" "Then she gets angry," Lucas said. "And that's fine. Angry means she's here, engaging. Angry means she hasn't disappeared inside herself yet." He looked at the room. "We're not trying to make her feel a particular thing. We're just trying to show her something true. Mia was quiet for a moment. "When did you get that?" she asked. "Last night." He looked at her. "Late." She nodded slowly. Something in her face relaxed slightly. The tight, careful expression of someone who had been managing this alone for a long time and was finally, tentatively, sharing the weight. "Go get her," she said. "I'll be here." He straightened his jacket. It was the first time he'd worn an actual jacket since they'd arrived at the resort. A light gray linen one, because Eleanor liked him in it. He'd packed it almost without thinking, and now he was glad. He walked back toward the elevators, toward the 6th floor, toward the room where his wife was probably already awake and sitting near the window with her coffee, watching the ocean do what it always did. And for the first time in almost a year, he walked toward her without an agenda about saving her. He walked toward her to see her. Eleanor was sitting exactly where he'd expected her to be, the window chair. A cream-colored armchair that had probably been placed there by some interior designer thinking about aesthetics rather than the specific way a person might spend hours in it watching water, had become her chair over the 3 days they'd been here. She'd claimed it the first morning without ceremony, pulling it a few inches closer to the glass, and that small act of territorial adjustment had struck Lucas as a good sign at the time. People who don't plan on being somewhere don't bother moving furniture. She had her coffee. She was wearing the white robe again over clothes, jeans, a soft blue sweater he'd bought her 2 birthdays ago that she'd never gotten rid of. Her journal was on the side table, closed. She was just looking at the ocean. She heard him come in and turned, and he noticed, the way you notice things when you finally started actually paying attention, that she took a small, almost invisible breath before she composed her expression, like she'd been somewhere else, somewhere she needed to step back from, before she could be here. "You look nice," she said, registering the jacket. "Thanks." He sat down on the edge of the bed, not too far from her. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than the night before." Which wasn't a strong endorsement, but it was honest. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. Outside, a pelican was doing something improbable over the waterline, banking sideways in a wind she couldn't feel from here. She watched it for a moment. "You're nervous about something?" "I'm not nervous." She gave him a look. "Okay," he said. "Mildly nervous. There's a difference." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. In the first months after her diagnosis, she'd smiled less. Not out of depression exactly, but out of a kind of conservation, like smiling took energy she was routing elsewhere. He'd missed it the way you miss music when a room goes quiet, and you don't immediately understand why the air feels different. "I want to show you something," he said. "Mia and I have been working on it. It won't take long. It's in the conference room downstairs, the one that looks out at the water." He held her gaze. "I'm asking you to trust me." She was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved over his face with that reading quality she had, that particular attention that had always made him feel, paradoxically, both seen and slightly exposed. "Is it a surprise party?" she said. "No." "Is it something medical? Are you about to tell me something Dr. Voss said that you've been sitting on?" "No. Nothing medical." "Then why are you nervous?" He thought about it honestly. "Because it matters," he said. "And I want it to go right." Eleanor studied him a moment longer, then she set her coffee cup down on the side table, stood up, and said, "Let me put shoes on." That was it. No more interrogation. She trusted him, which he still, after 9 years, sometimes found startling. The fact of being trusted by a person who was not naive, who had clear eyes and noticed everything and chose trust anyway. It felt less like something he'd earned and more like a gift that had weight to it, the kind you feel obligated to be careful with. She put on shoes. He waited. They walked out of the room together, and neither of them filled the silence in the elevator, and that was okay. Mia was in the hallway outside the conference room when they came around the corner. She was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, and when she saw them she straightened up quickly, which told Lucas she'd been more nervous than she'd let on earlier. Eleanor saw her and something shifted in her expression. Warmth. The particular warmth that had developed between them over months of hospital waiting rooms and long afternoons and conversations that apparently went deep enough that Mia had ended up carrying a secret for 2 weeks. "Hi," Eleanor said. "You're part of this." "I'm part of this," Mia confirmed. She looked at Eleanor with a directness that contained, if you were watching carefully, about a dozen things she wasn't saying. You okay? I haven't seen it yet. Fair. Eleanor glanced between them. You two are acting like I'm about to walk into an intervention. It's not an intervention, Mia said. It's sort of an intervention, Lucas said at the same time. Mia looked at him. He looked back. Eleanor watched this exchange with an expression that might, in different circumstances, have been amusement. Okay, Eleanor said. Open the door. She stopped just inside the threshold. Lucas watched her take in the room. The lowered lights, the projector screen against the ocean-facing wall, the actual ocean through the glass behind it, so that the two existed in the same visual plane. The white orchids on the sill. The two chairs placed side by side. Derek had done one last pass through the space 20 minutes ago and quietly left. The room now had the particular quality of preparation, the sense of something arranged by people who cared about the outcome. Eleanor's hand, which had been at her side, moved slightly, her fingers pressing together, which was what she did when she was managing something. Sit down, Lucas said, and he said it gently, the way you say something to a person you need to be careful with right now. She crossed to the chairs and sat in the one nearest the window. Lucas sat beside her. Mia took a position near the back of the room, close enough to be present, but outside the direct line of the screen. She'd made that decision herself, and it was the right one. This wasn't her moment to be in. She was the person who had made the moment possible and then stepped back from it, which required a particular kind of unselfishness that Lucas was beginning to understand was very characteristic of her. I need to say something before we start, Lucas said. Eleanor was looking at the blank screen. Okay, I've been so focused on keeping you here, he said, and he felt the inadequacy of the words immediately, but pressed on because there was no perfect version of this speech. He'd figured that out last night. Physically, in terms of treatment and logistics and making sure every possible door was open. I've been running that operation for almost a year, and I've told myself that was love, that fighting that hard was love. He paused. And maybe it is. Part of it. But I missed something. I was so busy fighting the disease that I forgot to just look at you. Not your blood work. Not your prognosis. You. Eleanor turned to look at him. Her expression had gone careful and still, the way it got when she was trying not to get ahead of something. And I'm not the only one, he said. There are people, a lot of people, it turns out, who see you, who have been seeing you for years, who have evidence of you that you apparently haven't been keeping track of. He looked at her steadily. I want you to see what they see. She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her face was working through something. Lucas, she said, and her voice was low and had a warning in it. Not anger, but the preemptive resistance of someone who has gotten used to protecting themselves from hope. It's not pity, he said, and it's not arranged. These are real people who wanted to say real things, and we just gave them the opportunity. He reached over and took her hand, and she let him, which she sometimes didn't anymore. Sometimes touch felt like too much. He'd learned not to take it personally. But she let him now, and her fingers closed around his. Just watch. That's all I'm asking. From the back of the room, Mia caught his eye and gave a small nod. He reached forward and pressed play. The first video was Cassandra Webb. He'd chosen it deliberately based on what Mia had said the night before about starting with something that wasn't immediately overwhelming, something small and specific and true. Cassandra, in her car with the afternoon light coming through the windshield, talking about a paper she'd written in 7th grade and a 9-word note at the bottom of the page. Eleanor made a small sound when Cassandra's face appeared on screen. Recognition. The involuntary noise of seeing something from years ago that you didn't know you remembered. She was quiet through the whole video, completely still, the way she went still when something was getting through. When Cassandra said she changed my life with 9 words, and I'm not sure she ever knew. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, just for a second, then opened them again. The next video began automatically. Marcus, 26, talking about staying in the classroom during lunch for 3 weeks and never once being made to explain himself. She just let me be somewhere safe. Lucas watched Eleanor more than he watched the screen. He watched her the way he'd apparently forgotten to watch her. Not for symptoms, not for warning signs, but with attention. Real attention. The kind that isn't looking for anything specific and therefore sees everything. She was gripping his hand tighter now. She didn't seem to notice she was doing it. Patricia Crane's video came third. Eleanor actually said "Pat" out loud when she appeared, a quiet, surprised syllable, like seeing someone walk into a room you hadn't known they were coming to. She listened to the story about the Friday night, and the casserole and the kitchen table, and the questions that had kept a woman in a job she loved for 18 more years. And somewhere in the middle of it, Eleanor's free hand came up to her mouth. Lucas didn't say anything. He didn't look away from her. The fourth video was Frank Okafor, and this one went somewhere different. Frank was a big man, 60 years old, with the careful dignity of someone who doesn't cry easily and is currently working very hard not to. He talked about his kids and the grilled cheese sandwiches and his youngest daughter calling Eleanor her extra mom, and his voice held steady until the last 30 seconds when it didn't, and he stopped and looked directly at the camera and said, "I just want her to know she helped us survive the worst time. I don't know if she thinks about those weeks, but we do. Every single day." Eleanor's head dropped forward, not collapsing, just bowing, the way a person does when something lands on them that they weren't braced for. Her shoulders came up slightly, like she was curling around something. Lucas moved his hand from hers to her back. Not rubbing it, not patting, just resting there. Present. "Keep going," Eleanor said, her voice thick. It wasn't a question. He reached forward and pressed the next one. Right. They watched for 40 minutes. Not all 30 videos, but cheers. They'd edited the sequence down to 19, the ones that were specific and honest and didn't overlap too much in their emotional territory, ordered the way Mia had suggested. Slow build, specificity first, emotional escalation in the middle, and then near the end, something different in tone. The different thing in tone was a video from a woman named Rosalind Bright, who had been Eleanor's college roommate for 2 years and was now a pediatric nurse in Seattle. Rosalind was practical and dry and funny in the way some very serious people are funny, using humor the way a scalpel is used, precisely and without waste. "I'm going to tell this story without crying," Rosalind started, "because Eleanor always made fun of me for crying at everything, and I want the record to show I can be an adult." She lasted about 90 seconds before her eyes went bright, but she kept talking. She told the story of their sophomore year when Rosalind had failed her first major clinical exam and had been completely convinced she should drop out of the nursing program. She'd called her mother, who had told her to push through. She'd called her father, who had said the same thing. She'd talked to her academic advisor, who had talked about resources available to struggling students in a way that made her feel like a statistical problem. And then Eleanor, who was 2 doors down in their dorm, had knocked on her door and said, with the complete absence of comfort speak, "Okay, walk me through what actually happened. Not your feelings about it. What actually happened. Start from the beginning." "We were up until 4 in the morning, Rosalind said. "She asked me about every question I'd gotten wrong. Not to make me feel bad. She genuinely wanted to understand the gap between what I knew and what I demonstrated on the test. By the time we were done, I had a study plan. I had a completely different understanding of how I was approaching the material, and I was furious at her for making it all seem so solvable." She smiled. "I passed the retake. I've been a nurse for 14 years. I have never, not once, walked away from a patient who needed me to stay." A pause. "That's Eleanor. She doesn't let you be smaller than you actually are." Eleanor laughed. It came out wet and surprised. The specific laugh of a person who got ambushed by something that was genuinely funny in the middle of being destroyed by something that wasn't. Lucas felt something loosen in his chest. There was her laugh. There it was. "She always hated that about me," Eleanor said, pressing the heel of her hand against her eye. "She'd call it your annoying problem-solving thing." "Is she wrong?" Lucas asked. "Absolutely not." Eleanor wiped her face, and for a second, just a second, she looked like herself. Not the patient self or the tired self or the carefully managed version of herself she'd been presenting to the world for months. Just Eleanor, who made study plans with roommates at 4 in the morning and drove to friends' houses with casseroles they hadn't asked for and wrote 9-word notes on papers that changed the direction of a person's life. They watched the rest. By the end of the 19th video, Eleanor's face was a complete wreck, in the way that sometimes indicates a person has been genuinely reached. Not polished cry, not photogenic emotion, but the real kind that doesn't photograph well and doesn't care. Her mascara, which she'd put on lightly that morning, apparently just as a habit, had done what mascara does. She had a crumpled tissue in one hand that Mia had quietly delivered somewhere around video 11. The screen went dark. Nobody said anything for a moment. Outside, through the glass, the ocean kept doing what it always did. "I didn't know Cassandra became a writer," Eleanor finally said. It was such a specific thing to say. Not that was beautiful, or I don't know what to say. Straight to the particular detail that had clearly lodged somewhere. "She published a novel last year," Lucas said. "Mia found her." Eleanor turned to look at Mia, who was still at the back of the room. Standing now, arms wrapped around herself, her own face not entirely composed either. "You did this," Eleanor said to her. "We did this," Mia said. "You started it." Mia was quiet for a second. "You asked me to promise you something once. I kept the promise a little late, but—" She shrugged, and in that shrug was everything she wasn't going to make into a speech. Better late. Eleanor stood up, and Lucas stood with her, and she crossed to the back of the room where Mia was standing and put her arms around her. It wasn't a pretty hug. It was the kind where you hold on too tight and for slightly too long because you need to, and the other person lets you. Mia held on back, and over Eleanor's shoulder, her eyes closed briefly. Lucas stood near the chairs and didn't say anything and let them have it. After, they walked down to the actual pool. The same pool where Lucas and Mia had sat 2 nights before, now in full daylight, the water bright and restless under the afternoon sun. Eleanor sat on the edge and took her shoes off and put her feet in, which she would never have done a year ago, before the careful domesticity of her previous self had been stripped down to something more direct. The three of them sat there for a while. Eleanor in the middle, feet in the water. Lucas on her left, shoes still on because that was just who he was. Mia on her right, pulling at a loose thread on the cuff of her hoodie. "I want to ask you both something," Eleanor said. She was looking at the water, her voice measured in the way it gets when she's saying something she's been holding for a while. "And I need you to not give me the managed version of the answer, the real one." "Okay," Lucas said. "Did you know, before last night?" She paused. "Did you know I'd been thinking the way I was thinking?" Lucas considered telling her the honest version carefully, but he'd promised her the real one. "Mia told me 2 nights ago," he said. "By the pool. Late." Eleanor nodded slowly. She turned to Mia. "You broke the promise." "I broke the promise," Mia said. She didn't apologize for it. "I decided the person you were when you made me promise that the version of you that genuinely wanted someone to step in if it got bad enough, that version of you would understand." She held Eleanor's gaze. "Was I wrong?" Eleanor looked at her for a long time. "No," she said finally. "You weren't wrong." She looked back at the water. Her feet moved slowly, stirring small circles. Lucas watched her profile, the way she was breathing, the way her shoulders were sitting. She looked lighter. Not fixed. He understood now, with a clarity he hadn't had 2 days ago, that this wasn't the kind of thing that got fixed. But lighter, like something she'd been carrying alone had been set down and redistributed. "I kept thinking about the cost of me," she said. "The financial cost, the emotional cost. I'd do the math in my head. Treatments, hospital stays, the time it took from Sophie's life, from your work, from—" She stopped. "I kept arriving at the same conclusion, that the math didn't work in my favor anymore." "Eleanor." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I know," she said. "I know how it sounds. I know it's not rational, but feelings aren't rational. That's the thing nobody tells you when you're going through something like this. You think you'll handle it the right way, the dignified way, and then you find yourself sitting on a balcony in the dark doing arithmetic about your own life." She shook her head slightly. "It's humiliating." "It's not," Mia said. "It's what happens when people spend too long being told they're a problem to be solved." Eleanor looked at her. "That's what medicine does," Mia continued, and she said it plainly, without apology. "Even good medicine. It turns you into a case. It talks about you in terms of prognosis and response rates and treatment windows, and you start to hear yourself the same way, like you're a problem with possible solutions." She pulled at the cuff thread again. "But you're not a problem. You're a person who had a life before any of this, and that life left marks on other people. And those marks are still there whether you can feel them or not. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Cassandra Webb, she said. I honestly barely remembered her. 7th grade, right? Quiet girl. Brown hair. She used to write these wildly mature sentences for a 12-year-old. Metaphors that shouldn't have worked and somehow did. She paused. I remembered the paper about the kitchen. I didn't remember writing the note. You did, though, Lucas said. I did. She seemed to be sitting with that. I wonder how many of those I wrote without registering them. You grade 150 papers a week. You write notes in the margins because that's what you do, that's the job, and then you hand them back and you move on to the next stack, and you have no idea that one of them is going to be kept for 12 years and referenced in someone's acknowledgement section. She looked down at the water. That's strange to think about. That impact doesn't require intention. Most of the best kind doesn't, Mia said. Lucas was watching Eleanor's face. He was watching her the way he'd committed to watching her, actually watching, not cataloging. She looked, he thought, like someone who had been reminded of something important that they'd lost track of. Not transformed, not suddenly healed or relit from inside, but reminded. Like a person who has been searching for their keys and someone says, check your coat pocket, and they put their hand in and there they are, where they've always been. Frank Okafor's daughter, Eleanor said. The one who called me extra mom. Do you know her name? Keisha, Mia said. She's 23 now. She's in her 2nd year of a master's program in social work. Eleanor absorbed this. Social work. Mia found out when she tracked down Frank, Lucas said. Keisha apparently, she mentioned Eleanor specifically when she talked about why she went into the field. Frank told Mia that story. Eleanor was quiet again. The afternoon was moving around them. A gull somewhere overhead, a child laughing at the far end of the pool, the smell of sunscreen and salt air that belongs specifically to resort pools in the afternoon. I've been thinking of my life in the past tense, Eleanor said, for months. Not consciously. I didn't sit down and decide to do it, but I was already writing the summary, already putting things in the finished category. She paused. Talking about Keisha in the present tense feels strange. Good strange. She looked at Lucas. There are people still in the middle of their lives who have me in them somewhere. Yes, he said. That's a different kind of weight than I've been carrying. He didn't respond to that immediately because it wasn't a prompt for a response. It was a person thinking out loud. He'd spent too long turning everything she said into a problem that needed addressing. He was trying now to just let her talk. She let her feet drift in the water. Mia had gone quiet beside her, watching the pool's surface with the focused inattention of someone who is giving privacy to something they're part of. I'm not going to pretend one afternoon fixed anything, Eleanor said. I want to be clear about that. I know, Lucas said. I still have whatever is happening in my chest. I still have the next set of scans. I still have days where getting up feels like the hardest decision I've made. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were clear. Not the emptied clarity of resignation, but the steady clarity of someone arriving at honesty. But today I feel like a person again. Not a patient, a person. She held his gaze. That's not nothing. That's not nothing, he agreed. She reached over and put her hand over his, and it wasn't the tight grip of a person holding on for dear life. It was just her hand on his hand, the weight of it, the warmth, the ordinary press of skin that means I'm here, and so are you. He turned his hand over and held hers back. Oh, dinner that evening was room service on Eleanor's balcony because none of them wanted to be in a restaurant. Too public, too much performance required. Lucas ordered too much food the way he always did, a habit from a childhood where abundance was never guaranteed and had to be insisted upon when it arrived. Eleanor ate more than she had in weeks, which Lucas noticed and didn't comment on, because some things are better received in silence. Mia had gone to change clothes and come back in a different hoodie, green this time, slightly faded, with a small paint stain on the left cuff that she'd apparently stopped noticing years ago. She was eating a bowl of pasta and periodically stealing fries off Lucas's plate, which she did without asking and which he allowed without comment, which meant they had apparently arrived at some level of comfort he hadn't mapped the arrival of. Sophie called during dinner, 6 years old, staying with Eleanor's parents in Connecticut, with the specific conversational energy of a first grader who has about 15 important things to say and no particular concept of order. Grandma let me have 2 scoops, Sophie reported. 2 scoops of what? Eleanor asked. Ice cream, chocolate, and the pink kind. Strawberry. The pink kind, Sophie repeated with the firmness of someone who has decided strawberry is a description, not a name. Also, I found a bug. A really big one. Grandpa said it was a beetle, but it didn't look like a beetle on my bug card. What kind of bug does your bug card say it is? I don't know. It had lots of legs. Lots of legs is typically a millipede situation. A millipede, Sophie said, with the delight of a word she was going to use constantly for the next 6 days. Eleanor was smiling. Not the careful smile she'd been producing for months, the one that was well-intentioned but effortful. This one was just a smile, the real kind, the kind that starts in the eyes and the rest of the face follows. Lucas watched her from across the small balcony table, over the remains of the too much food, in the warm evening air that came off the ocean and smelled like salt and distance. She was here. She was really here. Sophie talked for 9 more minutes about the millipede, a movie she'd watched that had scared her, but only a little, her friend Clara's new dog, and a question about whether elephants could swim. Eleanor engaged with all of it with the unhurried attention she gave children, real attention, the kind that treats their concerns as worthy of serious thought regardless of scale. When they hung up, the 3 of them sat in the kind of quiet that isn't empty. She sounded good, Mia said. She always sounds good, Eleanor said. She's 6. Everything is still possible for her. She set her phone down on the table. I want to be around for the part where things get complicated for her, where she needs someone who's been through something and came back from it. She said it simply, without drama, but it landed with weight because of everything that had preceded it today. The videos, the pool, the long quiet afternoon of recalibration. Lucas set his fork down. You will be, he said. Eleanor looked at him steadily. You don't know that. No, he said, but I know what you want now, and that's different from 2 days ago. She considered this. It is different, she said. You're right. The ocean moved below them, dark now, the moon making a path on the water that looked solid enough to walk on, though of course it wasn't. Somewhere along the beach, a fire was going. You could see the distant glow of it, small and warm against the dark, and the sound of music drifted up occasionally, faint and domestic, the sound of other people's ordinary evenings. Mia leaned back in her chair with her arms crossed and looked at the sky. She had the expression of someone who has just finished carrying something heavy and is still feeling the absence of the weight in their arms, not quite sure yet what to do with the lightness. Thank you, Eleanor said to her. Mia looked over. For breaking the promise? For keeping the other one. Eleanor's voice was quiet. The one from years ago. The one about not letting me get lost. Mia held her gaze for a moment, and there was something between them that Lucas understood he was witnessing rather than part of, the particular connection between 2 people who have seen each other at the bottom of things and decided to stay anyway, which is its own kind of love, different from the kind he had with Eleanor, but no less real. Always, Mia said, and left it there. They stayed at the resort one more day after that, the way Lucas had arranged. It wasn't dramatic, the last day. Nobody had a revelation. Eleanor had a bad hour mid-morning, a wave of nausea from the medication, followed by the particular bleak frustration that comes when your body reminds you it is still doing what it's doing, regardless of how much better your mind is feeling. She sat in the bathroom for a while, and Lucas sat outside the door and didn't say helpful things, which was an improvement over his previous methodology of saying every helpful thing he could think of until she asked him to stop. When she came out, she looked tired and slightly angry, the way a person looks when they're done with something they can't be done with. I hate this, she said. I know, he said. I mean, I genuinely, profoundly hate this. Yeah. She sat down on the bed, and he sat beside her, and she put her head on his shoulder, and they stayed like that for a while, which was not a solution to anything, and was also exactly what was needed. That afternoon, Eleanor asked Mia to teach her something. It came out of nowhere. They were all 3 sitting on the beach, Eleanor in a wide-brimmed hat that she'd bought from the resort gift shop for $14 and would probably never wear again, Mia drawing patterns in the wet sand near the waterline with her finger. Teach me something you know that I don't, Eleanor said. Mia looked up. Like what? Anything. Something practical. Something from your actual life, not a party trick. Mia thought about it. I know how to get a wine stain out of basically anything, she said. Occupational requirement. That's useful. I know how to split a single restaurant portion into 2 meals that don't taste like leftovers. Also useful. Also depressing. Mia smiled a little. I know how to read a table, she said. In 30 seconds of watching a group of people order, I can tell you who's unhappy, who's having an affair, who's celebrating something real versus something performed, and who's about to not tip. Eleanor looked genuinely interested. How? What followed was 45 minutes of Mia explaining the microsignals of human behavior that years of waitressing had wired into her. The way people hold their menus when they're overwhelmed versus when they know what they want. The specific posture of someone who feels unheard. The difference between the laugh of a person who is genuinely comfortable and the laugh of a person who is managing an impression. Eleanor listened with the attention she gave to things she found genuinely interesting, asking questions that made Mia think, pushing back on generalizations, adding her own observations from years of watching 12-year-olds in a classroom. Lucas sat slightly apart from them, ostensibly reading something on his phone, actually listening to both of them talk. There was something in the way they interacted. Easy, substantive, with the quality of 2 people who had gotten past the politeness stage into something more real, that made him aware of how much he'd been on the margins of Eleanor's emotional life without realizing it. Not excluded, just not fully present. He was going to work on that. The sun went down eventually the way it does, without asking, without ceremony, just slowly and then all at once. Eleanor stood at the water's edge in the last of the light, her shoes off, the hat in her hand, the waves coming up over her feet and then pulling back, that constant small erasure and renewal that the ocean does indifferently. For no one in particular, forever. Lucas came and stood beside her. She didn't say anything for a while. Neither did he. I've been thinking about teaching again, she said. He looked at her. Not full-time. I couldn't do full-time right now, but maybe part-time. A few classes somewhere, or tutoring. She looked down at the water around her feet. I've been thinking about Cassandra's paper, about the grandmother's kitchen, about how many papers I read in 6 years and how many of them were like that, just quietly extraordinary, and the kid who wrote it had no idea. She paused. I want to be in a room with kids again. I want to ask someone a question and watch them figure out they already know the answer. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" or "Let's talk to Dr. Voss first," or any of the things his instinct immediately offered up. Okay, he said. She looked at him. That's it? Just okay. What do you want me to say? She thought about it. Nothing, I guess. Okay is right. She looked back at the water. Okay is actually exactly right. The waves came in and went back. Somewhere behind them, Mia was packing up the beach bag, the sound of a zipper and a water bottle rattling, ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening. Lucas, Eleanor said. Yeah. I'm still scared. She said it quietly, not dramatically, just stating a fact. Most of the time, underneath everything, I'm still scared. Me too, he said. She seemed to weigh this. You never show it. I show it badly. That's different from not showing it. He looked at her profile in the fading light. The specific curve of her jaw, the way she was holding the hat by its brim with one hand. I've been scared for 11 months, and I've been converting it into action because that's what I know how to do with fear. But underneath all of it, he stopped, tried again. Underneath all of it, I'm just a person who is terrified of losing you, and I've been so busy trying to not lose you that I forgot to just be with you. She turned to look at him then, fully, and there was something in her face that he recognized. It was the look she'd had when they were first together, when they were still figuring out whether this was real, and she'd decided at some point that it was, that particular looking, that choosing. Be with me then, she said. He reached for her hand in the last of the daylight, and the ocean kept coming and going around their feet, cold and indifferent and reliable. And behind them, Mia shouldered the beach bag and gave them the respectful moment without announcing that she was doing so. The sky went purple, then gray, then dark. They stayed until the stars came out, They drove home on a Tuesday morning, and the drive back felt different from the drive out in the specific way that return trips always do when something has shifted in the people making them. Lucas drove. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat with her window cracked 2 inches despite the air conditioning, the way she always did on long drives because she liked the actual outside air regardless of temperature or logic. Mia was in the back with her feet pulled up on the seat, which she'd asked permission for before doing, and Lucas had said yes in a tone that suggested the question was unnecessary, which she'd registered without comment. They didn't talk much for the first hour. The resort disappeared behind them, then the coastal highway gave way to the interstate, and the ocean smell thinned out and eventually became just regular air again. Eleanor had her head resting against the seat at an angle, not asleep, but close to that unfocused state between sleep and thought where the mind sorts things without instruction. Around the 90-minute mark, she said, without looking away from the window, "I want to call Cassandra Webb." Lucas glanced at her. "Mia has her number." "I know." She paused. "I don't know what I'd say to her." "You don't have to know in advance," Mia said from the back. "That's not how talking works." Eleanor made a small noise that might have been agreement or might have been the sound of someone sitting with an uncomfortable truth. She was quiet for another mile or two. "I kept thinking about her all night," she said. "The paper about the kitchen. I have this very vague memory of it. I can't see her face clearly. I remember her handwriting was small and very even, which was unusual for 7th grade. And I remember thinking when I read that paper that this kid had already figured out something important about how to pay attention to the world." She turned the coffee cup she'd carried out of the hotel in both hands, though it had been empty for 30 miles. "And I wrote those 9 words and moved on to the next paper, and I never knew. Most of the good we do we never know about," Mia said. "That's not comforting. That's just information." "It's both." Eleanor considered this. Lucas drove. The highway opened up into wider lanes, and the traffic thinned, and the morning sun came in at an angle through the windshield that required the visor. "I'm going to call her," Eleanor said, "when we get home." "Good," Mia said. "Don't make it a thing." "I'm not making it a thing." "You're nodding in a significant way. I can feel you nodding." From the back seat came the sound of Mia determinedly not nodding. Lucas almost smiled. Almost. The rest of the drive settled into the comfortable medium of 3 people who have been through something together and don't need to keep talking about it. Music on low. The particular quality of silence that isn't silence exactly, but the presence of people who are okay being near each other without performing it. When they pulled off the interstate toward Millhaven, Eleanor straightened in her seat and looked at the town the way you look at a place you've been away from long enough to see it, rather than just recognize it. The main street. The green awning on the hardware store that had been that same shade of green since before she was born. The elementary school, which was the same building where she'd gone to school, where Sophie would go next year, which always gave her a mild vertigo of time. "It looks smaller than I remember," she said. "It always looks smaller when I come back from somewhere." "That's the place," Lucas said. "Not you." She glanced at him. "Since when did you get philosophical?" "I've been working on it." She turned back to the window, but she was almost smiling. Chad. The house was exactly how they'd left it. The specific disorder of a home whose owner has packed quickly and whose 6-year-old's influence is present in every room. Sophie's rain boots by the front door, one upright and one on its side. A drawing on the kitchen table that appeared to be either a horse or a large dog, or something that had started as one and become the other. The stack of Eleanor's medical folders on the counter, which Lucas had put there intending to go through them before the trip and hadn't. Eleanor looked at the folders briefly when she came in. Lucas watched her look at them. He waited. She picked up her keys from where they'd landed when she set things down, put them on the correct hook, which she did by habit, automatically, and then walked past the folders without touching them and went upstairs. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he gathered the folders, opened the cabinet above the refrigerator where the serious paperwork lived, and put them in there. Not hiding them, not pretending they didn't exist, just getting them off the counter and out of the center of the room, because a stack of medical files in the middle of your kitchen is a way of letting illness take up space it doesn't need. He'd deal with what was in them. He just didn't need to deal with them every time he came downstairs for a glass of water. Mia had stayed for a cup of coffee before heading back to her apartment on the other side of town. She rented a small place above a dry cleaning shop on Halter Street, the top floor of a building that was more practical than pleasant, but had good windows and a landlord who fixed things when they broke, which mattered more than aesthetics when you were 29 and working 3 jobs. The coffee sat between them on the kitchen table while Eleanor was upstairs, and for a few minutes it was just the two of them in the quiet house. "Is she going to be okay?" Lucas asked. Mia wrapped both hands around her mug. She thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved rather than offering the quick reassurance he probably wanted. "She's better than she was 3 days ago," Mia said. "That's real. That's not performance." She paused. "Whether she's going to be okay, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. But I think she wants to be, and before this trip I wasn't sure she still wanted to." He nodded. It wasn't the answer that felt good. It was the accurate one. "What do you need?" Mia asked. He looked up. "From me," she said. "Going forward, I can be around more, or less, whatever is actually helpful. I'm not trying to be a fixture if that's not what—" "You're not a fixture," he said. He stopped. The right word was the honest one, which was also the complicated one. "You're the person who knocked on my door at midnight. I don't know what we would have done without that." He looked at her steadily. "I'm asking you to stay." Mia looked at her coffee for a moment. "Okay," she said. She finished her coffee and left. And the house had the particular quiet of a place that was adjusting to something. Lucas went upstairs and found Eleanor asleep on top of the covers in the same clothes she'd traveled in, her shoes still on, which meant she'd sat down and been taken by sleep before she meant to be. He took her shoes off the way you do for someone who is deeply asleep and won't notice and doesn't need to, and put a blanket over her, and let her sleep until 3 in the afternoon. 3 weeks after they got home, Eleanor called Cassandra Webb. She did it sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water in front of her that she didn't drink. Lucas elsewhere in the house giving her the room, and she'd held the phone for a full 2 minutes before she dialed. Not because she was scared exactly. She wasn't going to use that word for this, but because some things require a moment before you can begin them, a small standing still in the doorway before you walk through. The phone rang twice. "Hello?" A young woman's voice, slightly cautious, the way people answer unknown numbers now. "Hi," Eleanor said. My name is Eleanor Bennett. I used to be Eleanor Marsh before I was married." A pause. "I was your 7th grade English teacher." A silence on the other end, not a long one, maybe 4 seconds. But 4 seconds carries different weight when you're waiting for a response that you've spent 20 minutes rehearsing around. "Mrs. Bennett," Cassandra said. And then, after another beat, "Oh my." It wasn't a sophisticated response. It wasn't a prepared one. It was just a person on the other end of a phone being genuinely surprised, and Eleanor felt the surprise of it too. The fact that her name, in this person's mouth, carried something. Weight. History. "I saw your video," Eleanor said. "Someone, my husband and a very good friend of mine organized. There were a lot of videos. I don't know if anyone explained the full context." "Mia Harper called me," Cassandra said. "She explained some of it. She was kind of private about the details. She just said you needed to hear some things." "That's accurate." Eleanor looked at the water glass. "I'm calling because I wanted to say, I've been trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to say, and I've been rehearsing it for 3 weeks, and I think what I want to say is just thank you for telling that story, and I'm sorry I didn't know about the book." "It came out last year," Cassandra said. It's not a bestseller or anything. My publisher has politely described the sales as modest." A slight laugh. "But it exists. It's a real book that you can hold." "What's it called?" "The Specific Weight of Small Things." Eleanor set her hand flat on the table. "That's a good title." "I think so too. My editor wanted to change it 3 times. I held firm." A brief pause. "Mrs. Bennett, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Do you remember my paper? The one about my grandmother's kitchen? I know you saw probably hundreds of them." "I remember it," Eleanor said. "Not perfectly. I remember the handwriting. I remember a line about hands, your grandmother's hands. And I remember thinking the sentences were too good for 7th grade. in the best possible way. Another silence. This one's softer. This one, I've been wondering for 12 years whether you actually read it or whether you just wrote that note, Cassandra said, and her voice had changed slightly. Younger somehow, or more honest, or both. Like, I've been carrying the idea of those 9 words for my whole adult life, and I never knew if they came from genuine attention or just a teacher being kind. They came from attention, Eleanor said. I read every paper, all 150 of them, every cycle. I was meticulous about it, probably to a fault. She paused. The note came from reading those specific sentences and thinking, this person needs to know this, not as encouragement, as information. The sound on the other end of the phone was difficult to name, something between a breath and a sound. The kind of thing a person does when they've been waiting for confirmation of something for a long time and it arrives. And the arrival is more complicated than they expected because relief and grief sometimes look the same from the inside. Thank you, Cassandra said. That actually matters. I wasn't sure it would matter this much. It matters, Eleanor said. They talked for 40 minutes. Not about the video or the medical situation or any of the weight of it. They talked about the book, about writing, about what it meant to teach and what it meant to learn, about Cassandra's grandmother, who had died 2 years ago, and about how writing the novel had been a way of keeping the kitchen alive in the world. Eleanor talked about going back to teaching, about the part-time idea, about Mia's description of her as someone who didn't let people be smaller than they actually were, which Cassandra found immediately recognizable. That's exactly it, Cassandra said. You made me feel full-sized at 12 when everything is trying to make you feel the opposite of that. When Eleanor hung up, she sat at the kitchen table for a while with the glass of water and didn't say anything to anyone. Lucas came through at some point, saw her expression, and put his hand briefly on her shoulder as he passed. She covered his hand with hers for a moment, then let him keep walking. The thing she was sitting with was complicated and not entirely comfortable, which was appropriate, because most true things aren't. She'd spent the better part of a year thinking of herself as a drain on the people around her, as a body in the process of failing, as a problem accruing cost. And now she was sitting with the evidence that she was also a person who had, at 30 years old, written 9 words in the margin of a child's paper that the child had kept for 12 years and built a life around. Both of those things were true. The drain and the 9 words. She was going to have to figure out how to hold both of them. The first week back was hard in practical ways that had nothing to do with emotion. Eleanor had a scan scheduled for the Thursday after they returned, which meant the 5 days leading up to it had the particular quality that pre-scan days always had. A low-grade static in the background of everything, a hyper-awareness of physical sensations that might or might not mean something, a waiting. Lucas had learned to recognize the pre-scan dynamic and had largely stopped trying to counteract it with optimism, which had been his previous strategy and had not worked. Now he just tried to be present in a low-key way, occupying the same space without demanding that the space be a certain temperature emotionally. The scan itself was on a Thursday at 11 a.m. at the Oncology Center, the same building where Eleanor had sat through 9 months of treatment, where she and Mia had first found each other in the waiting room over a shared dislike of the particular brand of herbal tea the reception desk offered in a small wicker basket. Eleanor knew the parking structure, knew which elevator was faster, knew the name of the woman at the front desk whose daughter was starting kindergarten this fall. She and Lucas went alone. Mia offered, and Eleanor said no, not unkindly, but with the clarity of someone who knows what they need and what they don't. This one she needed to be just her and Lucas, the original unit, the people who had been in it together since before there was an it to be in. Dr. Voss had been Eleanor's oncologist for 11 months. She was 51, efficient without being cold, with the quality of someone who has delivered enough bad news to have developed a very precise relationship with hope. She offered it in measured, specific doses rather than in the wholesale way that wasn't sustainable. Eleanor trusted her the way you trust someone who has never once told you what you wanted to hear at the expense of what was true. They sat in the small consultation room after the scan, the room with the framed print of a coastal landscape that had probably seemed calming to whoever selected it and was now just part of the furniture of anxiety. And Dr. Voss came in with her tablet and sat down and looked at both of them. The primary mass has not grown, she said. Eleanor and Lucas both went very still. In fact, Dr. Voss continued, looking at her screen. It's reduced marginally, which is not what I expected at this point in the protocol. She looked up. It's not dramatic enough to make claims about. I'm not using words like remission, but it is movement in the right direction, and it's real, and I want you to know that. The room did something strange for a moment. Pressure changed, or the light did, or something shifted in the way the air felt, the way it does when a held breath releases. Eleanor said, "How marginal?" 8% reduction in size. Not a reversal, but a pause and a pullback. Dr. Voss set the tablet on the desk. We're going to continue the current protocol and rescan in 6 weeks. I want to see if the trend holds. She paused. How are you feeling? Not physically. Generally. Eleanor looked at her steadily. Better than I did a month ago. In what way? The kind of way that's difficult to quantify for a medical chart. She held the doctor's gaze. I made some decisions about what I want, what I'm still doing here for. She paused. I don't know if that's medically relevant. Dr. Voss considered her for a moment. Everything is medically relevant, she said. I have patients who have data that looks good, and they decline anyway. And I've had patients whose numbers surprised me because something changed in how they were oriented toward being alive. She said it without drama or mysticism, just as clinical observation. I'm not telling you attitude cured anything. I'm telling you it's not irrelevant. She picked up her tablet. 6 weeks, same protocol. Take care of yourself in the ways you know how. In the car afterward, Eleanor and Lucas sat for a full minute before either of them started the engine. 8%, Eleanor said. 8%, he agreed. That's not nothing. That's not nothing. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and stared through the windshield at the concrete wall of the parking structure, which was painted the particular institutional beige of places that don't want to spend money on things that aren't structurally necessary. I'm not going to get my hopes up dramatically, she said. I want to be clear about that. Okay. I'm going to allow that this is real information, and that real information that trends this way is better than real information that trends the other way. That seems reasonable. And then I'm going to go home and call Mia and probably not tell her immediately because she'll make it into a larger thing than I have the emotional bandwidth for right now. You could just tell her. Eleanor turned to look at him. Have you met Mia? He thought about it. Fair. She called Mia on the drive home anyway, because she couldn't not, because the information was too large to keep in the car alone. And she told her. And Mia, to her enormous credit, said, "That's good," in a voice that was under control. And then there was a silence of about 3 seconds, and then she said, "Okay, I'm going to need a minute." And her voice was no longer under control. And Eleanor said, "I know, take it." And that was the extent of the dramatics, which was exactly right. Eleanor went back to teaching 6 weeks after the resort, not at a school. Not yet. A friend of a colleague of Patricia Crane's ran a community learning center on the east side of town, a nonprofit that offered free classes to adult learners. GED prep, ESL, literacy, basic writing skills. The kind of place that operated on a shoestring and a rotating roster of volunteers and paid part-time staff, where the fluorescent light in the third classroom had been flickering for 3 months because the budget for maintenance was perpetually allocated elsewhere. Eleanor came in on a Wednesday afternoon for what was supposed to be an introductory meeting with the director, a man named Terrence who ran the center with the particular combination of pragmatic exhaustion and genuine belief that characterizes people who have committed to unglamorous important work. He was 44, overextended, and had a line for a teaching volunteer that he'd been trying to fill for 2 months. The meeting lasted 11 minutes before Terrence said, "Can you start Thursday?" "This Thursday?" Eleanor looked at him. I have a group of 8 adult learners in a basic writing class. They've had 3 different substitute instructors in 6 weeks, and I'm losing them." He said it plainly, the way someone says something they've already said too many times. They don't need a perfect teacher. They need a consistent one. Eleanor looked at the flickering light for a moment. It pulsed irregularly, every 12 seconds or so, which was exactly the kind of thing that either drives you insane or becomes invisible depending on how much you have to focus on. "Thursday," she said. The class on Thursday had 8 people. A 52-year-old Guatemalan woman named Ana, who was trying to write a letter to her estranged son and needed help organizing what she wanted to say. a 23-year-old named Devin who had aged out of foster care and was working toward his GED with the urgency of someone who'd lost time and knew it. A recently retired postal worker named Gerald, who was writing his memoirs for reasons he didn't fully explain and didn't need to, and 5 others at various points of their own particular journeys, none of them fitting the flat category of adult learner any more than anyone fits any flat category. Eleanor walked in with a legal pad, a pen, and no lesson plan beyond a general intention, which was a methodological choice that would have appalled her younger self and felt correct to her current one. She said, "I'm going to ask everyone to write one sentence, just one, about something they know that they learned from actually living it, not from being taught it. Take 5 minutes." Gerald, the retired postal worker, looked up from the table. "One sentence, is it? One sentence is enough to start." He looked skeptical, but wrote something. 8 minutes later, 5 had turned into 8 because Eleanor recognized when a room needed more time and gave it. She said, "Who wants to read?" Nobody jumped for it, which was expected. She waited. She'd always been good at waiting. It had been one of her actual classroom skills, the capacity to hold the silence without filling it, because the silence was doing something and interrupting it was wasteful. Anna read first. In slightly halting English, she said, "I know that love stays even when the person doesn't, because I still love my son every day, and he hasn't called me in 4 years." The room was quiet in the way of a room that has just received something it wasn't expecting. Devin wrote, "I know that the system will give up on you long before you should give up on yourself, because I watched it give up on everyone around me and I'm still here." Gerald wrote, "I know that a route walked 1,000 times still has something new in it, if you look at it right, because I walked the same streets for 26 years and I never got bored." Eleanor read each sentence back to them after they read it, not to correct, just to let them hear what they'd made. By the end of the hour, all 8 people had read. 3 had written more than one sentence, because one sentence had opened something and they'd kept going. Gerald had half a page. Walking out to her car after, Eleanor called Lucas. He picked up on the second ring. "How was it?" She sat in the driver's seat without starting the car. Through the Learning Center's front window, she could see Terrence at his desk, bent over paperwork, the fluorescent light in his office doing its normal, steady thing in contrast to the one down the hall. "Gerald is going to write a book," she said. "He doesn't know it yet." Lucas was quiet for a beat. "Yeah?" "He walked the same mail route for 26 years, and he has a story for every block. The kind of stories that accumulate in a life that most people discount as ordinary." She looked at the steering wheel. "He's going to need someone to help him understand that ordinary is not the same as not worth telling." "That sounds like something you're going to do." "Probably." She paused. "It was good, Lucas. Being in a room and having something to offer. It was good." He said, "I'm glad." And she could hear in 2 words that he meant it completely, which was something she'd been learning to receive again. The uncomplicated fact of being loved by the person you were married to, which had gotten complicated by illness and fear and the months of carefully managing each other's states of mind instead of just being honest. "Come home," he said. "I'm coming home." She started the car. The radio came on to some station she didn't recognize playing a song she didn't know. And she left it because it was fine. It was just sound. And she drove home through streets she'd known her whole life that still had things she hadn't looked at yet. Mia came to dinner that Friday. This had become a thing that happened, not scheduled, not ceremonial, just a regularity that had established itself naturally the way some habits do, through repetition rather than intention. 3 or 4 times a week, Mia would end up at the Bennett house, arriving usually by 6, staying until 9 or 10, occupying the particular position she'd carved out for herself, which was somewhere between family and friend, and something that didn't quite have a name because it didn't need one. Sophie adored her. This had happened fast and with the completeness that 6-year-olds bring to adoration, total, unhedged, slightly disconcerting in its intensity. Sophie had decided within their first meeting that Mia was a person of interest, possibly because Mia talked to her the same way she talked to adults. Directly, without the modified register people use with children that children always detect and always slightly distrust. She asked Sophie questions and listened to the answers, and when Sophie said something that was wrong, she said, "Actually, that's not quite right," instead of redirecting around the error. and Sophie found this respectful rather than harsh. By the time they'd been back from the resort for 3 weeks, Sophie had decided that Mia should have a key to their house. "She's here a lot," Sophie explained to Lucas, with the logic of a 6-year-old who has identified a pattern and drawn a conclusion. If she had a key, she wouldn't have to ring the bell. "The bell isn't a problem," Lucas said. "It's unnecessary," Sophie said, using a word she'd clearly just acquired and was deploying with some enthusiasm. "Where did you learn that word?" "Mia." "Of course." Lucas had the key made and gave it to Mia without making anything of it, handing it over with her coffee one morning and saying, "Sophie decided you needed this," and Mia had taken it and turned it over in her hand once and put it on her keyring without ceremony, which was the right response. That Friday, Mia arrived at 6 with leftover soup from the diner she'd transported in a mason jar, which Eleanor accepted with the grateful practicality of someone who has learned not to refuse food offered without strings. Lucas was doing something in the living room that involved a spreadsheet and headphones, which he removed when Mia arrived, and Sophie was at the kitchen table doing homework with a pencil she kept sharpening more than necessary. "What's the homework?" Mia asked, sitting across from Sophie and pulling the pencil out of her hand before she sharpened it down to a nub. "Spelling." Sophie looked at the worksheet with profound dissatisfaction. "I already know how to spell these." "Then it'll go fast." "But I already know." "Sophie," Mia's voice was patient in the way that is patient without being soft. "Do the homework." Sophie picked up the pencil, a different one she produced from somewhere, and did the homework. Eleanor watched this from the counter, warming the soup, with the particular expression she sometimes had when she was watching something that made her feel a complicated mixture of things. Gratitude and something more melancholy, because there was a version of this scene, Sophie having someone like Mia in her life with this kind of easy authority, that Eleanor had feared Sophie would need to rely on in a way that shouldn't be necessary. She was trying very deliberately not to think that way anymore. It was a work in progress. "How was the class today?" Mia asked, looking at Eleanor. "I told Gerald he was writing a book." Mia looked up. "What'd he say?" "He said he was just writing things down." "Same thing, different framing." "That's what I told him." Lucas came into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, ostensibly looking for something, but mostly entering the room, which Eleanor recognized as a husband behavior, the need to be in the same physical space without a specific reason. She handed him a glass of water, preempting whatever he was going to claim to be looking for, and he took it without commentary. "The center wants me to do 4 days a week starting next month," Eleanor said. The kitchen had a small collective response to this. Not dramatic, just a shift in attention. 4 days is a lot," Lucas said. "It's not a full day each day. 3 hours in the morning. I'd be home by 1. "How do you feel about that?" Mia asked. "I feel like I want to do it." Eleanor stirred the soup. "I feel like I want to have something that belongs to me that isn't about being sick or getting better. Something that's just mine, where I'm useful." Lucas was quiet for a moment. Eleanor had learned to read his silences. This one was the calculating kind, the one where he was running variables against each other and trying to figure out how to say the thing that was honest without sounding like he was managing her. "The scan in 2 weeks," he started. "If the scan is bad, we recalibrate," Eleanor said. She said it with a steadiness that surprised even her a little. Not forced steadiness, but the real kind that comes from having made a decision about something and meaning it. "If it's bad, we figure it out. But I'm not putting my life on hold for the scan. I've been doing that for a year, and I'm done with it." She looked at him. "I have 8 people in a room on Thursday mornings who need consistent. I'm going to be consistent." Lucas held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Not the grudging nod of someone who has been overruled, but the actual nod. The one that means, "I see what you're doing, and I'm with you." "Okay, he said. "I'm still going to worry," he added. "I know. That's allowed." She turned back to the stove. "You're allowed to worry. Just do it quietly." Sophie looked up from her homework. "What are we worrying about?" "Nothing, that's your job," Eleanor said. Sophie considered this with the philosophical acceptance of a 6-year-old who has learned that some adult things are not available for child participation and went back to her spelling. Mia caught Eleanor's eye across the kitchen with an expression that communicated several things quickly: recognition, solidarity, and something that was almost amusement at how normal this moment was, how thoroughly ordinary. This kitchen with its soup and its homework and its husband leaning against the refrigerator with a glass of water he didn't need. How far from the pool at midnight and how close. Oh, the second scan, 6 weeks after the first, showed a 12% reduction. Dr. Voss used the word encouraging 3 times in the same meeting, which was more superlatives than Eleanor had heard from her in 11 months combined. She also used the word cautious twice and the phrase, "we're not out of the woods," once, but 12% was 12% and the direction was the direction. Eleanor cried in the car, which she hadn't done after the first scan, held herself together through the parking structure and the drive and most of the way home before it came over her at a red light 3 blocks from their house. The specific unstoppable kind that arrives when something you've been braced against for a long time starts to ease, and the body needs to do something with that. Lucas pulled into a gas station parking lot and let her cry. He put his hand on her back. He didn't say it's going to be fine, because it might not be. Because 12% was not a cure and encouraging was not recovered. But it was 12%, and the direction was the direction, and she cried because of that and because of all the months she'd spent doing math about whether she was worth the cost, and the math had come out wrong every time. "Lucas," she said, when the worst of it had passed. "Yeah. I want to have dinner. A real one at home. I want Sophie there and Mia there, and I want to cook something that's complicated enough to be annoying." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I want a normal evening." "I'll text Mia," he said. "Tell her to bring wine. The actual kind, not the kind she buys for herself." He pulled out his phone. Mia responded in 90 seconds. "On my way. And I always buy the actual kind. That's insulting." Eleanor read the text over his shoulder and laughed. The laugh was wet and slightly wrecked from the crying, but it was completely real. And outside the gas station, the afternoon was doing what afternoons do. Moving through its paces, sun going a little lower, traffic doing what traffic does, the ordinary machinery of the world running exactly as it should. She put her hand on Lucas's arm. "Let's go home," she said. He started the car. She fixed her face in the visor mirror with the efficient, unsentimental approach she had toward most practical things. And by the time they pulled into their street, she looked like herself. Not perfectly composed, not erasing what had just happened, but present. Here. Sophie was at Eleanor's parents' house, and Lucas picked her up on the way, and Sophie came out of the front door at a speed that suggested she'd been watching the window, which she had been. She climbed into the back seat and immediately began telling them about the beetle, which was definitely not a millipede, Grandpa had looked it up, and about a fight she'd had with her friend Clara that had apparently been resolved through the medium of shared animal crackers, and about a book she wanted, and about whether the family could get a fish. "We're not getting a fish," Lucas said. "Mia says fish are soothing." "When did you talk to Mia about fish?" "She texted me." Lucas looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked back at him with an expression that was entirely unhelpful. "She has her own phone?" he said. "She found an old one of yours in the junk drawer," Eleanor said. "She configured it herself. She's 6, Lucas, not 5. He looked back at the road. "We're not getting a fish." "Mia said maybe," Sophie reported. "Mia doesn't live here." "She has a key," Sophie said. Eleanor turned toward the window so that Sophie couldn't see her face, which had developed an expression she wasn't ready to defend. Dinner that night was a pasta with a sauce that Eleanor made from scratch, using a recipe she'd been meaning to try for 2 years and had never gotten around to, and it took 90 minutes and 2 failed attempts at the timing, and a moment where she thought the whole thing was going to be too salty, and Mia tasted it and said, "Add more cheese, it'll balance," which turned out to be correct. They ate at the kitchen table because the dining room felt formal for a Tuesday, and formality wasn't what any of them needed. Sophie sat between Eleanor and Mia and ate approximately 4 bites of pasta and then applied herself to the bread, which was fine, she was 6. Lucas opened a bottle of wine that was not the cheapest kind, and Mia raised an eyebrow at it, and he said, "Shut up," in the tone he used for things that weren't actually confrontational, and she said, "I didn't say anything." And Eleanor said, "Both of you be quiet, the pasta is important." The pasta was good. It was genuinely good, not just good for a sick person's cooking or good considering the circumstances, just good. The kind that people go back for a second bowl of without discussing it. After dinner, Sophie fell asleep on the couch at 8:30, in the way children fall asleep, completely and without warning, mid-sentence apparently, because Lucas found her there with one hand still reaching toward the remote. He carried her upstairs, which he could still do for another year maybe, and when he came back down, Eleanor and Mia were at the kitchen table with the wine and the remains of the bread. He sat down, poured himself the last of the bottle. The three of them sat there in the kitchen in the particular good quiet of an evening that has gone right. The dishes stacked but not yet washed. Sophie asleep upstairs, the house holding all of them in the specific way that houses do when the people in them are, for the moment, okay. The scan was good today, Eleanor said. She said it simply, like finally setting something down in the right place. Mia looked at her. Her eyes were very bright. She didn't say anything for a moment. How good, she said. 12%. Another moment of quiet. Okay, Mia said. Just that word. But she said it with her whole self, with everything she'd been carrying since a midnight pool and a broken promise and a list of 41 names, and Eleanor heard all of it in the one word. Okay, Eleanor said back. Lucas lifted his glass. Not a toast exactly, not theatrical, just lifted it, and they lifted theirs, and they drank. The night outside was ordinary and dark, and inside the kitchen the light was warm, and nobody needed to say what the moment meant because some things are understood without being said, and the best ones usually are. The third scan, 3 months after the resort, showed 21%. Dr. Voss sat with that number for a moment before she said it, which Eleanor had learned to read as a sign that the number was significant enough to require its own space before being handed over. She was looking at her tablet with the expression of a person reviewing something twice to make sure they're reading it correctly. Not out of disbelief, but out of professional rigor, the refusal to present information she hadn't fully confirmed. 21% reduction from baseline, she said. The mass has continued to respond. Eleanor was sitting in the same chair she always sat in, the one on the left side of the consultation room, which she'd claimed by habit somewhere around the 4th visit, and which had become hers in the way that spaces become yours when you've spent enough difficult hours in them. Lucas was beside her. They'd started holding hands in this room somewhere around visit 6, not consciously, just reaching for each other the way the body makes decisions before the mind authorizes them. What does that mean in practical terms? Lucas asked. He always asked the practical question, which was his function in these meetings, and which Eleanor had stopped resenting because someone needed to, and she was using all her capacity for other things. It means the treatment is working in a sustained way, Dr. Voss said. It means we continue. It means we don't celebrate yet, but we register what's happening accurately. She looked at Eleanor specifically. How are you functioning? Fatigue? Cognition? Fatigue is manageable. I'm teaching 4 mornings a week, and it's good. I'm tired afterward, but it's the right kind of tired. Eleanor paused. Cognition feels clearer than 3 months ago. I noticed things again. I was losing that. Dr. Voss made a note. Keep doing whatever you're doing, she said. I can't put that in a protocol, but it's relevant. In the parking structure, Eleanor didn't cry this time. She sat in the passenger seat and breathed through her nose for a moment and then said, 21. 21, Lucas confirmed. That's not a fluke. No. She looked at the ceiling of the car. That specific car ceiling look of a person who is processing something large in a small space. Then she looked at him. Do you know what I keep thinking about? Tell me. That conversation on the balcony. When you said you'd been so busy fighting the disease, you forgot to fight for my will to survive. She turned the words over carefully. I've been thinking about whether that's true, whether there's actually a relationship between those two things, between someone believing they matter and their body responding to treatment. She shook her head slightly. I know that's not science. I know Dr. Voss can't put it in a protocol. She said, keep doing whatever you're doing. She said that. You're doing something different than you were 6 months ago. I'm teaching again. I called Cassandra Webb. She paused. I'm letting you actually be there instead of managing you at a distance. He looked at her. Was that what you were doing? A little. You were doing it to me too. She said it without accusation, just as observation. We were both so scared that we were handling each other like things that might break. And I think that made it worse, actually. She looked at the steering wheel. People can feel when they're being handled. He thought about this. The honesty of it sat between them without requiring anything other than acknowledgement. "I was handling you," he said. "I know, and I was letting you, which was also a choice." She reached over and put her hand briefly on his arm. "I'm not saying it to be critical. I'm saying it because I think we're doing it differently now, and I can feel the difference, and I wanted to name it." He covered her hand with his. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." They sat there for another minute, in the parking structure with its concrete and its fluorescent lights, and its general absence of anything aesthetically meaningful, which was exactly the right place for this particular conversation. Undecorated, just real. "Let's go get Sophie," Eleanor said, "and let's tell her we're going for ice cream, the real kind, not the grocery store kind. She's going to want the pink. She's always going to want the pink." He started the car. Winter arrived in Millhaven the way it always did, not dramatically but insistently, working its way into everything by degrees until one morning you look out the window and accept that summer is truly finished and there's no arguing with it. The trees on their street went yellow and then bare. Eleanor bought a new coat, the first one in 2 years that wasn't selected primarily for how easy it was to get on and off in a hospital setting. It was dark green and slightly too long, and she loved it immediately. The Community Learning Center on the east side of town had become, over those months, genuinely important to her in a way she hadn't fully anticipated when she walked in with a legal pad and no lesson plan. Gerald, the retired postal worker, had 32 pages of manuscript that he brought in on the third Friday of every month for Eleanor to read and annotate. Devin had passed 2 of his 5 required GED subject tests and was moving through the third with a speed that suggested he'd been capable of this all along and just needed consistent conditions. Anna, who had come in originally to write a letter to her son, had sent the letter in October and received a reply in November, 2 pages, handwritten, which she brought to class and showed Eleanor with the composed expression of someone who is refusing to cry in public and barely succeeding. Eleanor had read it privately, in Terrence's office, at Anna's request, because Anna wanted someone to tell her what it meant. Not the Spanish, which she understood. The emotional content, the subtext, what her son was actually saying under the words he'd chosen. "He's scared," Eleanor told her. "He's using formal language because he doesn't know how to be informal with you yet. He's maintaining distance because he doesn't know if he can trust the distance to close safely." She handed the letter back. "But he wrote 2 pages. That's not nothing." Anna held the letter with both hands for a moment. "What do I write back?" "Write the simplest true thing. Don't try to say everything at once." Anna had nodded, the nod of someone storing information carefully, and Eleanor had felt the familiar sensation that teaching had always given her and that she'd forgotten was available. The particular satisfaction of being useful in a way that doesn't leave a mark on the ledger sheet, that doesn't show up anywhere quantifiable, that is just 2 people in a room and one of them having something the other one needs. She called Patricia Crane on the drive home from the center one Thursday, a call that had become a monthly habit since the resort. 2 women with history between them who had gotten out of the pattern of waiting for a reason to be in touch. "Gerald wrote a chapter about a dog," Eleanor said. "A stray that followed his route for about 6 years, and he fed it biscuits out of his bag every day, and one day it stopped showing up, and he never knew why." "Is it good?" Patricia asked. "It's beautiful in the specific way of someone who has never tried to write, and therefore doesn't know what he's supposed to be doing and just does it." Eleanor stopped at a light. "He called the dog Tuesday because that was the day it first appeared. Are you helping him or getting out of his way?" "Mostly getting out of his way. A little helping with punctuation." "That's the right ratio." The light changed. Eleanor drove through the old part of town, past the hardware store with its perpetual green awning, past the coffee shop that had been there since she was in high school, and inexplicably still had the same sign in the window from some promotion that must have ended years ago. "How's Lucas?" Patricia asked. "Better. We're better." She said it simply because it was simple, because better was the right word. Not fixed, not transformed, just better, which was its own kind of achievement when better was what you'd been working toward in the dark for a long time. He started leaving his phone in the kitchen at night, instead of on his nightstand. "Is that significant?" "He's been sleeping with his phone on his nightstand for our entire marriage. He'd check it at 2 in the morning when he couldn't sleep." She paused. "Now he leaves it downstairs, and if I wake up at 2, he's just there, not checking anything. Just there." Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's not a small thing. No, Eleanor agreed. It's not. Lucas's relationship with his work had been changing in ways that were difficult to describe to anyone outside of it, and would have been difficult to explain even to himself if he'd tried. He hadn't done anything dramatic, hadn't sold the company, hadn't resigned from boards, hadn't made any of the sweeping declarations that people make in movies when life forces them to reassess. What he'd done was quieter than that, and probably more durable. He'd started saying no to things, not randomly and not recklessly. He still showed up, still performed the functions that the business required, still made the calls and attended the meetings that actually mattered. But the elaborate scaffolding of availability he'd built over 15 years, the returning of emails at 11 p.m., the conference calls on Saturday mornings, the constant ambient readiness that had become indistinguishable from his personality. He'd begun dismantling it quietly, piece by piece, in the way you dismantle something carefully when you've decided you're not rebuilding it. James noticed first. You didn't respond to the Whitfield email, James said, on a Tuesday morning in November, in the particular tone of a man who has organized his professional life around the expectation that his boss responds to everything immediately and is now recalibrating. I saw it, Lucas said. I'll respond Thursday. James looked at him. It's been 3 days. Whitfield can wait until Thursday. If he can't, he'll call. If he calls and it's actually urgent, I'll pick up. Lucas continued what he was doing, which was looking at a document that was not the Whitfield email. Not everything that arrives in an inbox is as urgent as it presents itself. James considered this. That's a shift in philosophy. It is. Should I adjust anything on my end? Stop flagging things as urgent unless they are. We've been using urgent as a default, and it's inflated the term to uselessness. He looked up. Also, I'm not available on weekends. If something genuinely cannot wait 48 hours, you have my number and you know when to use it. But the weekly check-ins on Saturdays are done. James processed this without visible drama, which was one of his more valuable qualities. Noted, he said. How do you actually feel about that change? James paused, slightly surprised to be asked. Relieved, if I'm honest, he said. My wife will also be relieved. Good. Lucas went back to the document. Let's both have weekends. The change didn't make him less effective. If anything, the opposite. He'd been confusing activity with productivity for so long that the distinction had disappeared, and its reappearance was clarifying. He started finishing things rather than perpetually managing them. He started walking to the office twice a week instead of driving, which took 40 minutes instead of 8, and which he used to consider an irrational use of time and now considered the best 40 minutes of his day. He came home for dinner with a consistency that had been theoretical for years and was now just what happened. Sophie noticed this with the directness of a 6-year-old. You're home a lot now, she observed one evening, in the same tone she might note a change in the weather. Is that okay? Lucas asked. She thought about it seriously. Yes, she said. But you don't know how to watch cartoons right. I'm watching them wrong? You comment on things. She gave him a look of restrained tolerance. You're not supposed to comment. You're just supposed to watch. Noted, he said, in exactly the same tone James had used. Mia was in the kitchen and made a sound that was officially not a laugh. Mia's life had been changing too, in the smaller and less dramatic ways that people who live in the outer orbit of a story tend to change, shifted by the same forces that move the central characters, but in a different register, a different key. She'd cut down to 2 days at the diner. Not because the money was better, it wasn't, but because Terrence had offered her a position at the Community Learning Center, administrative and part-time, with the frank explanation that what he had available was not impressive, but that she was good with people in a way the center needed, and he'd pay her what the budget allowed, and she could negotiate toward more when more existed. She'd sat with it for 4 days, which was longer than she usually took to make decisions, because the diner was familiar, and familiarity had its own value when you'd grown up without much stability, and the Learning Center was a small nonprofit that ran on goodwill and optimism and a flickering fluorescent light. Eleanor had said, when she asked, "What do you actually want to do? Not what makes financial sense, not what's safe. What do you want to do?" "I want to be somewhere that matters," Mia said, which was the honest answer, and also the one she hadn't quite said out loud to herself before saying it. "Then you already know." She'd told Terrence yes the next morning. He'd said good and offered her a start date and asked if she wanted coffee. It was the least ceremonial hiring of her adult life, and also, somehow, the most significant. Her apartment on Halter Street had gotten incrementally better over the fall. Not in any expensive way, but in the small ways that are possible when a person starts caring about a space again after a period of not quite caring. She'd bought a plant, which had been an act of optimism she'd been suspicious of at the time. The plant had survived 3 months, which felt like an endorsement of something she couldn't entirely name. She'd also started writing things down, not a journal. She wasn't a journal person. She'd tried it in her 20s and found she used it to catastrophize more efficiently than she did in her own head. Just notes. Small observations, things she noticed, things people said that were worth keeping. She'd started doing it after Eleanor's description of the Cassandra paper, the idea that impact doesn't require intention, that a person can write 9 words and change a life without knowing. She was aware this was not the same thing, and she wasn't pretending it was. She just liked the idea of paying attention on purpose, of making a record. There was a line she'd written from something Gerald had read in class one Thursday. The route never changed, but I changed, and when I changed, the route changed with me. She'd put that one on the wall above her desk. December arrived and Sophie turned 7 with the ceremony she felt the occasion deserved, which was considerable. She had opinions about the cake, the location, and the guest list with the specificity that suggested she'd been planning since at least October. "I want Mia to do the candles," Sophie told Eleanor, approximately 2 weeks before the birthday. Eleanor was making lunch. "What does that mean, do the candles?" "Light them, and say the thing." "The birthday thing?" "The whole thing. You know." Sophie made an impatient gesture. "The whole birthday speech thing." "I don't think birthday speeches are traditional." "Mia will know what to say." Eleanor looked at her daughter, the 7 years nearly arrived version of her, with her father's jaw and Eleanor's eyes and some third quality that belonged entirely to herself, the irreducible Sophiness that had been visible since approximately the 2nd week of her life. She looked at her and felt the layered, complicated thing she often felt when she looked at her, which was, "I am here, and you are here, and that is extraordinary, and I didn't always know if I'd get to keep knowing it." "I'll tell Mia," she said. Sophie considered this resolved and moved on. The birthday party was 7 children in the backyard on a December afternoon that was cold enough to require coats, but not cold enough to move things inside, and Sophie had negotiated this outcome despite Lucas's meteorological concerns. Mia ran what could charitably be called games, and what actually looked more like controlled chaos with prizes, because she had a practical approach to children that involved clear expectations and immediate consequences and zero condescension. And children responded to this consistently. Lucas watched her from the back porch with a cup of coffee, and the specific expression of a person observing something they find both competent and slightly astonishing. Eleanor came and stood beside him. "She's good," he said. "She's very good." Sophie listens to her. Sophie listens to her better than she listens to either of us, which I've decided to accept as a feature of the situation rather than a personal failing. He looked at Eleanor sideways. "Feature. We provide consistency, and she provides entertainment. It's a functional division of labor." In the yard, Mia was adjudicating a dispute between 2 7-year-olds about a rule in a game that she had invented 15 minutes ago and therefore was definitionally the authority on. She did this without raising her voice, and with the calm of someone who has spent years navigating human disagreements in the specific conditions of a busy restaurant, where the stakes feel enormous and the window for resolution is approximately 90 seconds. "She's had a hard time," Lucas said, "before all this. I don't know the full story, but I know it hasn't been easy." "No," Eleanor said. "It hasn't. She never talks about it." "She talks about it, just not in the way you're looking for." Eleanor looked out at the yard. "She talks about it through what she does. The way she shows up, the way she stays without making you earn it." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "I used to wonder why she got so involved," he said. "With us. With Eleanor. With you." He stopped, the slight stumble of someone who sometimes had to remind himself that the person he was talking about was the same person he was talking to. "With a woman she'd met in a waiting room." "Did you figure it out?" He looked at Mia, who was now leading 7 children in something that appeared to involve running in circles according to a rule only she fully understood, and who was laughing, the real kind, not the performing kind, at something Sophie said. "I think she was lonely," he said, in a way she didn't have language for. And Eleanor saw it and didn't perform a response to it, just made room. And Mia stayed because staying was what she'd always wanted to do somewhere and hadn't been able to yet. Eleanor didn't say anything. She looked at him with the expression she sometimes had when he said something that surprised her, not dramatically, but genuinely. The look of someone recalibrating a map based on new information. "You've been paying attention," she said, "working on it." She put her arm through his, the easy sideways press of years of standing beside someone in various weather. "She's family," Eleanor said, not as announcement, just as fact. The kind of fact that doesn't require declaration because it's already been decided by the evidence. "She's been family for a while. We just didn't have the word for it yet." He nodded. They stood on the porch in the December cold and watched Mia stop the running game, crouch down to Sophie's height to say something private, and then stand up while Sophie relayed whatever it was to the other 6 children with the authority of someone sharing important intelligence. The other children immediately formed a different kind of circle. "What do you think she told her?" Lucas asked. "Something about making sure everyone wins," Eleanor said. "She always does that. Changes the rules before anyone loses in a way that matters." What? The 4th scan was in January. Eleanor woke up that morning before her alarm and lay in the dark for a while. Not anxious exactly. She'd come to some kind of arrangement with the pre-scan feeling over the months. Not an elimination of it, but a coexistence. This is here and I'm not going to argue with it. Lucas was asleep beside her, on his back, one arm across his face in the specific way that meant he'd fallen asleep worrying about something and his body was still braced. She watched him for a moment in the dark. She thought about this version of this morning she'd had 14 months ago, before the resort, before Mia's knock at midnight, before the conference room, and the videos and all the accumulation of things that had changed without being visible changing. That version of this morning had carried a different weight, not the healthy fear of someone with something to lose, but the exhausted math of someone calculating whether the cost of continuing to be here exceeded the value of it. She didn't do that math anymore. That wasn't because things had gotten easy. It was because she'd decided, somewhere in the months that followed, that the equation was wrong, that she'd been quantifying herself in units that didn't reflect what she actually was, and that the miscalculation had nearly cost her everything. She reached over and put her hand on Lucas's arm. He woke up almost immediately, the way light sleepers do, the way he'd been sleeping for over a year, never fully under, always close enough to the surface that a touch brought him back. "What's wrong?" he said, the reflexive first question, before he'd fully registered where he was. "Nothing," she said. "It's early. You can sleep more." He turned his head to look at her in the dark, his eyes adjusting, his brain catching up to the timeline. "Scan today." Scan today. He moved his arm so it was around her shoulders, which was not their usual geometry. They'd been sleeping carefully for so long, the slight gap that develops when one person in a bed is fragile and the other is afraid of adding to the fragility. She let him, and it felt like something being corrected. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like someone who has a scan today." She paused. "Okay, mostly okay." He was quiet for a moment. The house made its settling noises, the particular vocabulary of a house in winter, contracting slightly in the cold, the heat kicking on with its familiar rhythm. "Whatever it shows," he said. "Whatever it shows," she said back. "I know." She did know. That was the thing. She actually knew, in a way she hadn't 14 months ago, that whatever the scan showed was one piece of information and not the sum of who she was. The scan would show what the scan showed. Dr. Voss would say what she said. And then Eleanor would go home and go to the Learning Center on Thursday, because Devin had a practice test this week, and Gerald had a new chapter, and Anna had gotten a second letter from her son, and Eleanor wanted to hear about it. Her life was currently larger than her illness. That was new, and it was real, and no number on a scan changed it. The number, as it happened, was 31. 31% reduction from the original baseline. Not remission. Dr. Voss still didn't use that word. Was careful and precise about not using it. because precision was what Eleanor needed from her, and they both knew it. But sustained, significant directional response to treatment, which was the clinical language for something that in ordinary language meant, it is working more than we expected, and the body that contains you is fighting effectively. Eleanor sat with the number. What are the odds at this point? She asked. Dr. Voss looked at her. They'd developed over 14 months a particular mode of communication that dispensed with the softening, because Eleanor had made clear early that she preferred accuracy to comfort, and Dr. Voss had respected it. Better than they were, she said. Significantly better than they were when we started. The trajectory suggests continued response. She paused. I'm not making promises. The data doesn't support promises. But this is the best scan I've given you, and it reflects a real pattern, and I want you to understand that. Eleanor nodded. Lucas, beside her, had the expression of someone who is holding something very carefully because the alternative is dropping it. Okay, Eleanor said. Okay, Dr. Voss said. On the way home, Eleanor called Mia before she called her parents, which said something about the order of things now. Mia answered on the first ring. Well? 31. Silence. Then, quietly, Eleanor. I know. I know. Another silence, the companionable kind, the kind that exists between people who have spent enough time together that quiet is not awkward but inhabited. I'm coming over tonight, Mia said. I was going to cook. Then I'll bring wine. The actual kind. Obviously. A pause. I'm really glad, Eleanor. Me too. Eleanor watched the winter town go past her window. The hardware store, the coffee shop, the elementary school. Me too. 10. February brought the kind of cold that made the community learning center feel warmer than it actually was, which was a psychological trick that Terrence's limited heating budget did not entirely provide, but proximity and activity compensated for. Eleanor's Thursday class had expanded to 11 students, word having traveled in the quiet way. Things travel in communities that share resources and information through proximity and trust. The new students included a woman named Barbara, 59, who had retired from a clerical job 3 months ago and was having what she described as a crisis of purpose, with the frank self-awareness of someone who had stopped pretending she was fine. She was writing a series of letters to her younger self, which Eleanor had suggested as an exercise and which Barbara had taken to with a specificity and velocity that suggested she'd been carrying these things for decades and needed only the permission. I told her she was going to ruin her marriage, Barbara reported one Thursday, reading from her notebook in the level voice she used when the content was not level at all. 31-year-old me, I mean. I told her she was prioritizing the wrong things. I told her that Kevin was the kind of man who needed to feel needed, not managed, and she already knew that, and she was managing him anyway. She looked up. Is this too personal for class? This is exactly personal enough for class, Eleanor said. It feels like therapy. Writing always feels like therapy. That doesn't make it therapy. Gerald looked up from his own notebook where he'd been adding something. What's the difference? Therapy is someone else helping you understand what happened. Writing is you figuring out what happened so that maybe someone else will understand it later. Eleanor looked at the room. One is for you, the other is both. Gerald wrote that down. She noticed he wrote down things she said, which she still found startling. The fact that words she said in a fluorescent-lit room on a Thursday morning went into someone's notebook and became part of their working understanding of something. She hadn't stopped being startled by it. She hoped she wouldn't. Devin passed his third GED test that month, a week before the Thursday class, and showed up on Thursday with the paper confirmation in a manila envelope that he set on the table in front of Eleanor without preamble. She looked at it. 3 down, she said. 2 left, he said. You're ahead of where you thought you'd be. He shrugged with the particular nonchalance of someone who is genuinely pleased and doesn't want to perform more than that. The math one's going to be hard. We'll work on the math one. You don't teach math. I'll learn enough to help you. How hard can it be? Devin looked at her with the expression of someone who had multiple responses to that statement and was choosing the diplomatic one. You want me to answer that honestly? Probably not, Eleanor said. Bring me the practice materials next Thursday. He brought them. She spent 3 evenings that week with Lucas's old college math textbook and a YouTube tutorial on logarithms, which was a humbling experience she would later describe to Patricia Crane as the most educational 2 hours I've had since I stopped being a student. And the following Thursday, she sat with Devin for 90 minutes working through the problem types and was genuinely useful by the end of it, if not elegant. Lucas, who had found her on the couch one of those evenings with the math textbook and a defeated expression, had said nothing and gone to get her a cup of tea. She'd looked up and said, "Don't," meaning don't make a thing of it, and he'd set the tea down and said, "I wasn't," and gone back to what he'd been doing. He'd gotten better at that, at being present without converting presence into commentary. Mia, when told about the logarithms, had the most useful response. "Do you actually understand them now, or are you just pattern matching?" "Somewhere in between." "Okay, that's usually enough." March. And Eleanor's laughter came back all the way. Not the careful laugh of the preceding year, the one that had returned in the conference room, but still carried an air of someone testing whether it was allowed. The full one, the one that was slightly too loud and that she'd been embarrassed about in formal settings her whole life, before deciding at some point in her 30s that it was not her problem. It came back one evening during dinner when Sophie told a story about what had happened at school, involving a classroom hamster, a misunderstanding about cage security, and the subsequent 15-minute drama that had apparently ended with the hamster in the school librarian's cardigan pocket. And Eleanor laughed until she had to set down her fork, the kind of helpless, thorough laugh that uses the whole body and is completely immune to dignity. Lucas watched it happen. Mia, who was there for dinner, was also laughing, but she was watching Eleanor too, so both of them watching the same thing, recognizing the same thing, understanding without having to say it what they were seeing. Later that night, after Sophie was in bed and Mia had gone home, and the house had settled into its usual nighttime quiet, Lucas found Eleanor in the kitchen doing something unnecessary with the dishes, reorganizing the cabinet above the counter for no reason except that she felt like it, which was a thing she did when she had energy and didn't know what to do with it. "You laughed tonight," he said. She turned to look at him. "I laugh." "The real one. The loud one." She was quiet for a second. Then, "Yeah, I missed it." She turned back to the cabinet, moved 2 glasses, decided they were fine where they'd been, and moved them back. "I didn't know I was losing it until it came back." She closed the cabinet door. "It's strange. The things you stop noticing are gone." He came and stood beside her at the counter. Not dramatically, not with intention, just the way he'd started inhabiting the same spaces she was in. Without agenda, without the performing of togetherness, just being near. "The scan results next month," he said. "I know." "Are you scared?" She thought about it honestly. "A little, less than before. Not because I think the outcome is guaranteed. I know it's not." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, looking at the kitchen in the particular way she had of looking at ordinary things when she was thinking. "More because I know what I'm doing here now, in the day-to-day." She looked at him. "I know what I'm doing here with you, with Sophie, at the center." A pause. "With Mia." She looked at the window over the sink, the dark outside, the faint reflection of both of them in the glass. "Before the resort I felt optional, like my presence or absence would balance out eventually, and now I feel necessary, in a specific way, not like a burden necessary, like a piece of things." She shook her head slightly. "I don't know if I'm explaining it right." "You are," he said. "The teaching," she said. "Devin is going to pass his GED. I know he is, and when he does, I want to be there. I want to be the person he hands the paper to." She looked at Lucas. "That's a specific reason to be here. In the future tense. I have them now. I have reasons in the future tense." He looked at her in the kitchen light, this woman he'd been scared of losing for over a year, and thought about how fear had changed shape for him too. From the operational fear that had driven action to something quieter and more honest. The fear of someone who has understood what they have and what losing it would mean and has stopped pretending otherwise. He was still scared. He would probably always be a person who carried a version of that. But the fear no longer ran the house. She did. "I talked to James today," he said, "about the European accounts. I'm not going. Eleanor looked at him. The London trip? The whole quarter. I was going to be back and forth for 3 months. I canceled it. He watched her face process this. I can manage those accounts remotely. James can handle the ground presence. There are 4 months of scans still ahead of us, and I don't want to be in London for them. I want to be here. She held his gaze for a moment. He expected her to argue, to tell him it was unnecessary, to do the thing she used to do of protecting him from the inconveniences her illness created. Okay, she said. That's it? That's it. She pushed off the counter and walked past him toward the stairs, then stopped and turned back. Lucas. Yeah, thank you. She said it simply, directly, without qualification. Not thank you for sacrificing or thank you, but you didn't have to. Just thank you. For being here. For choosing here over London, over the accounts, over the scaffolding of unavailability he'd spent 15 years constructing. Always, he said. She went upstairs. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, in the quiet of a house that was asleep except for them, listening to the sound of her footsteps on the stairs, the sound of the bedroom door, the specific sequence of sounds that meant Eleanor was home and present and here. He turned off the kitchen light and followed her. April came with mud and green and the aggressive optimism of early spring, and the day before Eleanor's next scan, she went to the Learning Center for her usual Thursday class and afterward walked 3 blocks to the coffee shop, the one with the outdated sign in the window, and sat at the table by the front window with a coffee and Gerald's newest chapter, which he'd given her the week before and which she'd been waiting for a quiet hour to read. She read it in 40 minutes, which felt short, but some things are exactly as long as they need to be. The chapter was about the Tuesday dog, about the morning it stopped appearing on the route and the particular quality of absence that follows when something that has become part of your day simply isn't there anymore. The way the block felt different, the way Gerald kept expecting to see it as he rounded the same corner for weeks afterward. The way a space that a living thing used to occupy holds a different kind of emptiness than a space that was always empty. Near the end, Gerald had written, I never knew what happened to it. Lost, adopted, dead. I had no way of knowing and nobody to ask. But I kept feeding it biscuits for 6 months after it stopped coming because leaving them in my bag felt like giving up on something I didn't have permission to give up on yet. Eleanor sat with that sentence for a while. She took out her phone and sent Gerald a text. The chapter is ready. It's very good. Don't change the last paragraph. He responded 4 minutes later with the texting pace of a 60-year-old who hunts each letter individually. Thank you. I wasn't sure about Tuesday. She texted back. Keep Tuesday. She finished her coffee. Through the window, the spring street was doing what spring streets do. People in lighter jackets than the temperature quite warranted, a kid on a bike, someone's dog straining at a leash toward something invisible with the total commitment that dogs bring to invisible things. She thought about tomorrow's scan and felt the familiar low-level static, and let it be there. And also let it be manageable, because both of those things were true, and she'd gotten better at holding multiple truths without needing to resolve them into one. She had somewhere to be tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. She left a tip that was larger than the coffee warranted, a habit she'd picked up from Mia's description of what generosity meant to people who depended on it, and walked back out into the April morning. The April scan showed 44%. Dr. Voss said the number and then set her tablet down on the desk, which she had never done before in 14 months of consultations. Setting the tablet down was a departure from her usual methodology, and Eleanor registered it immediately. The way you register when a person who always does something a particular way does it differently, because the difference is intentional. That's not a rounding error, Dr. Voss said. That's a sustained, significant, measurable response that has now crossed the threshold where I'm comfortable using different language. Eleanor looked at her. What language? Meaningful remission is the language I'm prepared to use. Not cure, not resolved, but the mass has reduced to a size and activity level where it is, for the first time, not the primary fact of your medical situation. She held Eleanor's gaze with the directness that had always been her most reliable quality. You still need monitoring. You still need the protocol. This is not the end of the medical management, but you are not the same patient you were 14 months ago. The numbers say that clearly. The room did something. Eleanor couldn't describe it more specifically than that. The room did something, the air or the light or the pressure of it, and she sat in it and felt the shift without trying to name it. Lucas had both hands flat on his knees. Eleanor recognized this as his version of holding himself still, the physical discipline of a person managing something large. "What do we do?" he said. His voice was even. "We continue the current protocol for another 3 months and rescan. If the trend holds, we begin discussing a step-down maintenance approach." Dr. Voss paused. "And you both go live your lives in the meantime. That's not a platitude. That's a medical recommendation." Eleanor said, 44. 44. She looked at the coastal landscape print on the wall, the same one that had been there for 14 months, the one that had always seemed slightly impersonal, chosen for its calming properties rather than any particular merit. She looked at it and thought about how many times she'd sat in this room receiving information that required sitting with, and how different this particular sitting felt from all the others. "Thank you," she said to Dr. Voss. She meant it in a way that encompassed 14 months and all the times the doctor had told her the true thing instead of the comfortable one, and Dr. Voss received it with a small nod that communicated she understood the scope of it. They walked out through the building the way they always walked out, past the front desk, past the wicker basket of herbal tea, through the glass doors. But at the doors, Eleanor stopped and turned around and looked back at the waiting room. Ordinary Tuesday afternoon, 4 people in the chairs, all of them in the specific posture of waiting that she recognized in her bones. One woman, around her age, sitting with her hands folded in her lap and looking at the middle distance, the way a person does when the present moment is too much to look at directly. Eleanor had been that woman. For months she had been that exact version of that posture in that chair. She looked for another moment, then turned and walked out into the April afternoon. In the car she called Mia. Mia answered before the first ring had finished, which meant she'd been holding her phone. 44, Eleanor said. What came through the phone was not a word. It was a sound. Involuntary, brief. The kind of sound that a person makes when something they have been quietly hoping for a very long time arrives, and the body responds before the mind can organize a response. Then, say it again. 44% reduction. Meaningful remission. Her words. A long silence. Then Mia said, in a voice that was working very hard to stay level and not entirely succeeding, Okay. A breath. Okay. Are you crying? I'm not crying. I'm recalibrating. Those look the same from the outside. I'm aware, so... Another breath. Eleanor, I need you to understand that I am extremely composed right now. You're not. I'm not, Mia agreed, and her voice broke cleanly on the last word, and Eleanor sat in the passenger seat and let her, and did not try to manage it or redirect it or protect Mia from the feeling, because Mia had earned this cry, and it belonged to her as much as anyone. Lucas drove. He reached over and took Eleanor's free hand. She held the phone to her ear with one hand and his hand with the other, and listened to Mia put herself back together on the other end of the line, the specific sounds of it, a breath, a short laugh at herself, another breath, and felt the improbable weight of being someone whose continued existence mattered enough to someone else to make them cry in a parking lot on a Tuesday. Come for dinner, Eleanor said. I'll bring wine, Mia said thickly. The actual kind. Always. Word spread in the quiet way that news spreads through the people who have been waiting for it. Eleanor called her parents, who had been tracking every scan with the careful distance of people who love their child and have learned to receive information without projecting onto it. Her mother cried. Her father said good 3 times in succession, which was his version of the same thing. She called Patricia Crane, who said I knew it, with the confident inaccuracy of someone who had not known it but had needed to believe it, and was now receiving that belief as confirmed. She texted Cassandra Webb, who responded with 3 words, write me tomorrow. She did not send out a general announcement. It wasn't that kind of news. It was the kind that traveled person to person through the specific channels of people who had been part of the long months of it, who had contributed something to the getting here even if they didn't know the full inventory of their contribution. Devin heard at the Thursday class, because Eleanor told the class, because they had been present for the difficult months in the specific way that people who share a room on a regular basis become present in each other's lives, whether or not the presence is formally acknowledged. Devin said, "So you're good now?" "I'm better. Better is real." "But you're still coming on Thursdays." "I'm still coming on Thursdays." He nodded with the economy of someone who has made peace with a lot of uncertain outcomes and knows how to receive a good one without over-investing in it. "Good," he said. "Because the last practice test I scored a 68 on the math section, and I need another month." "Then we have another month," Eleanor said. Gerald gave her a chapter that day. Not one he'd been working on. A new one, written apparently in the week since she'd texted him about Tuesday the dog, as if the news had opened something. It was about the last day of his route, retiring his mailbag, the particular feeling of carrying something for 26 years and then not carrying it anymore, the phantom weight of it in the following weeks, the way his shoulder would tense up on weekday mornings at 7 a.m. For months, because his body still believed it was supposed to be somewhere. Near the end, he'd written, "Loss and completion look the same from the outside. The difference is inside the person carrying it. I've spent 3 years thinking I lost something when I retired. Sitting in this room on Thursday mornings, I've started to understand I completed it. That's a different weight entirely." Eleanor read it twice. Then she looked up. "Gerald," she said. He was watching her from across the table with the calm dignity he brought to everything. "This is the book," she said. "This is what the whole thing is about. Everything before this chapter was leading here." He thought about it. The route and the carrying. The difference between loss and completion. She held up the pages. "This is the spine of it. Everything else hangs on this." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the Learning Center window, the April street was doing its ordinary thing. Somewhere in the building, the fluorescent light in the third classroom was still flickering. Terrence had gotten a quote for fixing it, but hadn't gotten around to scheduling it, because something else always needed the budget first. "How do I write toward it?" Gerald asked. "The earlier chapters. How do I make them lead here without them feeling like they're leading here?" "You don't do anything to them yet," Eleanor said. "You finish the draft first. You find out where the end is, then you go back to the beginning and see what it wants to be." She paused. "You can't revise toward something you haven't reached yet." He wrote that down. She noticed he'd started using a different notebook, a nicer one, the kind with a cloth cover that someone had presumably given him or he'd bought deliberately because the things he was writing had started to feel worth a better container. She drove home that afternoon through the spring town, the windows down, the outside air doing what April air does, that particular combination of cold underneath and warm on top that belongs only to the transitional weeks, that you can't get anywhere else in the year. She drove past the elementary school and thought about Sophie, who had started first grade in September and who had come home on the first day with strong opinions about the class hamster situation, and a best friend named Priya, who was already a regular fixture in their house. She drove past the coffee shop and thought about Gerald's last paragraph. She drove past the hardware store with its permanent green awning and thought about what it meant to drive a familiar route and still find things in it. She thought about the woman in the waiting room that morning, the one with her hands folded, looking at the middle distance. She'd been thinking about her since they left. 3 weeks later, Eleanor called Terrence into the small office at the back of the Learning Center and told him she wanted to start a second Thursday class. A writing class, specifically, not GED prep, not basic literacy, but a dedicated space for people who wanted to write about their lives. Open enrollment, free, hosted twice a month, 4 hours each session. Terrence sat with this for a moment. He did the budget math in his head with the expression of someone for whom budget math was a permanent low-grade occupation. "I'll teach it for free," Eleanor said, anticipating the calculation. "My time is not the constraint." "What do you need?" "Notebooks, pens, the room with the working light." He looked at her. "The flickering light is supposed to be fixed next month." "I'll take either room." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" he asked, and it was a genuine question, the kind that wasn't skeptical but was actually curious. Why this? Why now? Eleanor thought about how to answer it honestly. "Because writing is how people figure out what they've lived through," she said, "not what happened to them. What they've lived through. There's a difference. And the people who come here are people who have lived through things that are worth the telling, even if nobody has ever told them that. She paused. I have a retired postal worker who is writing a book he doesn't know is a book. I have a woman writing letters to her younger self that are going to outlast her. I want more of that. I want a room specifically for that. Terence looked at her with the expression of a man who runs a nonprofit on optimism and goodwill, and recognizes both when he sees them in someone else. Second Thursday of the month, he said. Fourth Thursday if enrollment warrants it. Thank you. Thank you, he said, and meant it for more than just the class. The first session had 6 people. The second had 9. By the fourth session, it had 14, and Terence had to bring in extra chairs and apologize for the folding kind, and nobody complained because folding chairs were the least of what the room contained. Eleanor ran the sessions the same way she ran her Thursday classes. A prompt, 5 minutes. Read if you want. No correction of content. Occasional gentle work on the architecture of a sentence, the difference between showing and telling, the specific craft question of how to make a reader believe that something mattered by making them feel why it mattered before they're told. A woman named Constance, 67, wrote about her husband's dementia. Not the end of it, the middle of it, the years when he was still partially there, still sometimes in a conversation, and then suddenly not. She wrote about the specific cruelty of a disease that lets you love someone and be lost to them at the same time, and the particular loneliness of being a caregiver for someone who occasionally looked at you and didn't know your name. She read it to the room on the third session, and the room was completely silent for a moment after, in the way that rooms go silent when something true has been put into it. You should send this somewhere, Eleanor said. Constance looked at her. Where would I send it? I'll find out. There are literary journals, magazines, publications that specifically... She stopped herself. Let me find the right place and I'll tell you next session. For now, keep going. There's more. Constance looked at her pages. There's a lot more. Then write it. After each session, Eleanor drove home feeling the specific good, tired of a person who has used themselves in the right way, spent themselves on something that returned more than it cost. She'd forgotten that feeling existed. She'd been so long in the landscape of medical depletion, where everything taken was taken by the disease and nothing given back, that she'd stopped expecting a different kind of tired was possible. Lucas noticed the change in her posture when she came home on class days. He didn't name it. He just poured her a glass of water without being asked, because he'd learned that on class days she forgot to hydrate, and she took it with the unceremonious gratitude of someone who has been with a person long enough to receive care without needing to perform receiving it. June arrived and Devin passed his GED, all 5 subjects. He called Eleanor on a Tuesday afternoon, and she could hear in his voice the specific things she'd been listening for. Not excitement exactly, because Devin was not an excitable person, and not relief either, though relief was certainly in there. Something quieter than both of those. The sound of a person arriving somewhere they had navigated toward through genuine difficulty and were now standing in, looking around, trying to understand what standing here actually meant. I got a 73 on the math, he said. That's above passing. 5 points above passing. 5 points is passing. Eleanor was in her car in the Learning Center parking lot, window down, the June heat coming in. Devin, you did it. Yeah. A pause. It doesn't feel like I thought it would feel. What did you think it would feel like? Bigger. Like, louder. I thought I'd feel louder. He was quiet for a moment. I just feel like I did a thing I was supposed to do years ago, and I finally did it. That's exactly what it is, Eleanor said. And doing things we were supposed to do years ago but couldn't until now, that's not a failure story. That's the whole story. The fact that you did it is the story. He was quiet for another moment. What do I do now? What do you want to do? I've been thinking about community college. There's a program, medical administration. I've been looking at it. Then you apply. I don't know if I'll get in. You apply first. That's the step that's available right now. You do the step that's available, and then you see what opens. She paused. I'll write you a recommendation letter if the application asks for one. Another pause longer than the others. When he spoke, his voice had shifted into something she recognized. the voice of someone who is receiving something they needed and didn't know they were going to get today. "Yeah," he said. "Okay, thank you." "Come to Thursday class," she said. "Bring everyone news." He did. He walked in with the paper, the actual certificate, which he'd gotten printed, which he hadn't mentioned he was going to do, and set it on the table in front of Eleanor without ceremony, the same way he'd set down the practice test confirmation months ago. The same gesture, but completely different weight. The class responded with the warmth of people who had been beside someone for months and understood what the paper meant. Gerald reached across the table and shook Devon's hand. Anna, whose English had become substantially more fluent over the months of Thursday mornings, said, "I am proud of you," with the deliberate care of someone choosing the exactly right words in a language that was not the one she'd grown up in, and the care made it more, not less. Devon sat down. He looked at the class, at Anna and Gerald and Barbara, with her letters to her younger self and the newer faces who had joined in the spring. And he looked at the paper on the table, and he looked at Eleanor. "What's the prompt today?" he said. Eleanor looked at him, looked at the room. Had the thought she sometimes had in the middle of a Thursday morning, the thought she couldn't say out loud because it would sound too large for a fluorescent-lit room with folding chairs and a drafty window, which was, "This is the most important thing I do. Write about something you kept even when keeping it was hard," she said. August brought the fifth scan, and the number was 58. Eleanor heard it and sat very still and thought about 44, which had felt enormous, and how 58 was beyond what she had allowed herself to hope for when hoping had felt dangerous. She thought about the woman she'd been 14 months ago on a balcony in the dark, doing math that didn't account for any of this, didn't account for Gerald or Devon or Constance or Cassandra Webb's second novel, which she'd heard about through Cassandra's occasional texts, and which was apparently going to be dedicated to an unnamed seventh-grade teacher. Didn't account for Sophie's opinions about the classroom hamster, or Lucas leaving his phone in the kitchen, or Mia's plant that had now been alive for 10 months and had a name that only Sophie knew. Didn't account for any of the specific, irreplaceable, irreducibly hers things that constituted being Eleanor Bennett in the world. Dr. Voss said they would begin the step-down maintenance protocol in October. She said the word stable 3 times in the same meeting. She said the body had responded in a way that exceeded the conservative projections from 14 months ago. She said all of this in her direct, unsentimental way, and Eleanor received it in the same register, directly, without decoration, just the clean fact of it. In the parking structure, Lucas sat in the driver's seat and didn't start the car for a full 2 minutes. Eleanor let him have it. She understood. It was hitting him differently than it hit her because she'd been living inside it and he'd been living beside it. And the particular fear of losing someone you love is its own specific country with its own specific weather, and relief in that country takes time to arrive even after the danger has passed. 58, he said finally. 58. He turned and looked at her. Really looked, in the way he'd relearned over the past year. The actual looking, not the monitoring. She looked back at him and didn't perform anything. Just let him see her. "I want to go back," he said. "Where?" "The resort, the Meridian. All 4 of us." He paused. "I want to go back with you and Sophie and Mia. I want to sit by that pool again when everything is different." Eleanor held his gaze for a moment. Thought about the midnight pool with its moving blue light and the palm trees and the particular quality of that night. The urgency and fear of it. The way Mia had looked standing in the corridor with her pale face and her red-rimmed eyes. The way 3 quiet knocks had changed the geometry of everything. "Okay," she said. "This fall, maybe?" October. After the maintenance protocol starts. After the maintenance protocol starts. She reached over and pressed her palm briefly against his jaw. An old gesture, something she'd done in their early years and had lost somewhere in the difficult ones and was finding again piece by piece, and he covered her hand with his and held it there for a moment. "Let's call Mia," she said. He handed her his phone. They went back to the Meridian in the second week of October. The drive down was different from both previous versions. The first time full of the ordinary complaints and diversions of a family with a 7-year-old, and the second time charged with everything that had preceded the first visit. This time, it was just 4 people in a car, Sophie talking about Priya's birthday party and whether fish could be birthday presents, Mia, in the back beside her with the specific patience she'd developed for Sophie's extended monologues. Lucas driving with the window cracked the way Eleanor usually did on long drives because she'd told him once that she liked the actual air, and he'd started doing it too. The coast emerged in the early afternoon, and the smell came through the windows. The particular October version of the ocean smell, sharper than summer, with an edge to it that summer's warmth doesn't allow. Sophie stopped talking about the fish birthday present and just looked out the window, which was how Eleanor knew the ocean still did what it had always done to people. Interrupted them, made them go quiet in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. The resort looked the same from the outside, deliberately, expensively, the same, the way places that charge for the feeling of permanence are maintained. The palm trees along the entrance drive, the blue of the pool visible beyond the lobby glass, the particular light of a coastal afternoon. They checked in, and Sophie immediately wanted to know where the pool was, a question she directed at Mia rather than her parents, which Mia answered without drawing attention to the delegation. Eleanor stood in the lobby for a moment after Lucas took the bags to the elevator. She looked at the space, the chairs, the front desk, the wicker basket of herbal tea that all resort lobbies seemed legally required to provide. She looked at the corridor that led to the pool. She thought about 14 months ago, the 3 a.m. quality of this same corridor, Mia's footsteps ahead of her. Mia came and stood beside her. Strange? Mia asked. A little. Good strange or bad strange? Eleanor thought about it. The kind that means something happened here and it was real. She looked at the corridor. The kind where the place holds it for you. Mia was quiet for a moment. I almost didn't knock, she said. Eleanor turned to look at her. Mia was looking at the corridor too, her arms loosely crossed, her expression containing something she was stating rather than confessing. The past tense fact of a decision that had been difficult and was now context. I stood outside his door for 11 minutes, Mia said. I counted because I kept thinking I'd lose my nerve and I wanted to know how long I held it before I did. She paused. I'd promised you not to tell him, and I thought, if I break this promise and you're angry at me, I can live with that. But if I don't break it and something happens, I can't live with the other thing. She looked at Eleanor. It wasn't a clean choice. I was terrified both ways. I know, Eleanor said. I know it wasn't clean. Are you glad I did it? It was a genuine question, not rhetorical, the kind Mia asked when she actually needed the answer. Every day, Eleanor said. Every single day. Mia nodded. She had the contained expression she used when something landed fully, and she didn't want to perform the impact, the private version of being reached. Eleanor had come to know that expression the way you come to know the specific vocabulary of someone who has become necessary to you. From the direction of the pool, Sophie's voice arrived through the lobby. MIA. The pool has lights in it. All pools have lights in them, Mia called back. These are good lights. Mia looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked back. Go, Eleanor said. Toy. That night, the 4 of them had dinner on a large balcony overlooking the water, a table big enough that Sophie had room to put her crayons on it and work on a drawing of what she described as a millipede, but which bore stronger resemblance to a caterpillar. Lucas ordered too much food. Mia stole fries. The ocean was dark beyond the railing, and the moon was doing its usual thing, making a path on the water that looked walkable from a distance. After dinner, Sophie fell asleep at the table with her head on her arms and her crayons scattered, which was a thing she still did at 7 in the same way she'd done it at 5 and 4 and 3. Completely, without gradation, one moment present and the next moment gone. The total sleep of someone who has not yet learned to be suspicious of rest. Lucas carried her in without waking her. He came back out onto the balcony, and the 3 remaining adults sat in the specific quiet that follows a child falling asleep. Quieter than regular quiet. The quiet of something small being protected. The ocean moved below them in its indifferent, reliable way. I've been thinking about something, Eleanor said, looking at the water, about what I want to do with the writing program at the center. She paused. I've been in touch with a woman at the University Extension program. There's a model where community writing programs can get formal affiliation. It doesn't change the program. It just gives it access to resources and gives the students access to certain credentials. I've been thinking about building toward that. How long does that take? Lucas asked. 2 years, maybe 3 to do it properly. You're thinking in years, Mia said. Eleanor looked at her. I'm thinking in years, she said. Not triumphantly, just noting it. The fact of thinking in years was its own kind of answer to a question that had hung over the past 14 months. You plan in years when you believe in the future tense, when the future tense has become something you inhabit rather than something you look at from a careful distance. Mia was smiling. The real kind. The one that stayed in the eyes. Also, Eleanor continued, I think Constance should try to get her essay published. I found 2 journals that would be the right fit, and I'm going to ask her next session if I can help her submit it. What's the essay about? Lucas asked. Her husband, his dementia. Eleanor turned her coffee cup. It's one of the most honest things I've read in years, the kind of writing that makes you feel less alone in something you haven't even experienced yet. She looked at the ocean. That's the whole point, isn't it? The reason we tell stories at all, so that someone else's dark room doesn't have to be entirely dark. Lucas looked at her. He had the expression she'd been seeing more of lately. Not the vigilant expression, not the managing expression, but something quieter and more settled, a man who had arrived somewhere after a long transit and was still learning the geography, but recognized it as home. I want to say something, he said. Both women looked at him. He looked slightly uncomfortable, which was unusual. Lucas was rarely publicly uncertain, had spent 15 years cultivating the opposite, and the discomfort was evidence of something genuine underneath. I've been thinking about this trip, he said, about what it means to come back here. He looked at Eleanor. A year ago, I would have organized this as a celebration. There would have been a plan, a thing to mark the occasion. I would have made it into an event. He stopped. And I realized I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to sit here with you, both of you. He looked at Mia, too. No occasion, just here. Mia was quiet for a moment. That's different, she said. I know. Good different. I know that, too. Eleanor looked at him and then at Mia and then at the ocean and felt the layered, complicated thing that was not happiness exactly, but contained happiness. Contained also the memory of the hard months, the scans and the hospital corridors, and the nights she'd spent doing the wrong math about her own life, and the specific grace of having been reached before that math became final. She felt all of it at once, which is how you feel things when enough time has passed that you can hold the whole of something. She thought about what she told Barbara in the writing class, that loss and completion look the same from the outside, and the difference is inside the person carrying it. She thought about Gerald's Tuesday dog and the biscuits he'd kept in his bag for 6 months after it stopped coming. She thought about 9 words written in the margin of a paper that had been kept for 12 years. She thought about a midnight knock and a pool lit from beneath, and 3 people sitting on concrete with the ocean smell and the palm trees and everything still uncertain. She thought about the way impact doesn't require intention, and the way small things accumulate into the architecture of a life without anyone overseeing the construction. I want to go down to the pool, she said. Lucas looked at her. Now? Now. It was 9:30. The pool was still open. She stood up and Lucas stood with her, and Mia stood too, and they went down the corridor and through the glass doors, and the warm night air came at them immediately. Thick with salt, the low sound of the ocean beyond the fence, the palm trees moving overhead in the reliable wind. The pool was lit from beneath, the same moving blue light. Eleanor walked to the edge and sat down, not on a lounge chair, but on the concrete deck, the way Mia had sat that first night, close to the ground. She took off her shoes and put her feet in. The water was warm from the day. Lucas sat beside her, and after a moment Mia sat on her other side, and the 3 of them sat at the edge of the pool, with the water moving around their feet, and the moon doing what it always did, and the ocean sound coming in and out like something breathing. Nobody said anything for a while. Eleanor looked at the water. The lights beneath it moved with the surface, never exactly still, never exactly the same shape twice. She thought about what she'd told Cassandra Webb, that Eleanor had always written the note because she read the paper and thought, this person needs to know this. She wondered what Cassandra was writing now. She wondered whether Devin would get into the community college program and what he'd find there. She wondered whether Anna's son would come to visit, whether Gerald's book would find a reader, whether Constance's essay would land in the right journal and reach the right person sitting alone in their own version of a dark room. She thought about all the specific, unremarkable, enormously important things she was still here to wonder about. The first time I sat here, Mia said, I was terrified. I know, Eleanor said, not just about you, about whether I was doing the right thing, whether it was mine to do. She paused, looking at the water. I kept thinking, who am I in this story? I was a waitress who met a woman in a hospital waiting room. I didn't belong in whatever was happening. You made yourself belong, Eleanor said. That's different. I showed up, Mia said. That's all I did. I just kept showing up. Eleanor turned to look at her. Mia was watching the water, her expression the contained one, the private one. But something in the set of her shoulders had changed from that first night. The tight, held quality was gone. She sat the way a person sits when they have put something down and are no longer carrying its weight. Showing up is almost everything, Eleanor said. I taught long enough to know. Half of what changes a life is just someone refusing to not be there. Mia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Are you talking about me or are you talking about yourself? Eleanor considered it. Both, she said. Lucas, on Eleanor's other side, had his feet in the water too. He was looking at the pool's far end where the light was brightest beneath the surface, and he had the expression of a man thinking about something carefully in the way he'd learned, without converting it into action, without translating it into agenda, just sitting with it and letting it be what it was. I used to think money protected people, he said, that if you had enough of it, you could keep the people you loved safe. He paused. Not in a naive way. I understood it wasn't magic, but I believed it was the primary tool. If something is wrong, resources solve it. If something is damaged, resources fix it. He looked at the water. And then Eleanor got sick, and I threw every resource I had at it, and it helped. And it also wasn't enough by itself. He paused again. What was enough was Mia knocking on a door at midnight, 30 people recording a video, Eleanor calling a student she barely remembered. He shook his head slightly. None of it cost what I was prepared to spend. All of it cost things I didn't know I needed to give. The water moved. The palm trees moved. Somewhere past the pool fence, the ocean kept at its permanent, indifferent work. I've been thinking about that woman, Eleanor said. From the waiting room this morning, at Dr. Voss's office. What woman? Mia asked. There was a woman in the waiting room when we left, sitting with her hands folded, looking at the middle distance. Eleanor looked at the water. She was me. A year ago, she was exactly me. Lucas looked at her profile. I want to do something with that, Eleanor said. I don't know exactly what yet, but I keep thinking, I had Mia. I had someone who showed up. And I wonder about the people who don't, who sit in that room and do the math and get the wrong answer because they don't have a person who refuses to let them. She paused. I've been thinking about whether the writing program could expand in that direction, into oncology centers, into spaces where people are waiting and the waiting is the kind that eats at who you are. A writing program in a hospital, Mia said. A writing program anywhere. People are trying to remember who they are outside of what's happening to their bodies. Eleanor looked at her. It's not a fully formed idea, but it's there. 2 to 3 years, Mia said. At least. Mia nodded slowly. The way she nodded when she was saying yes with her whole self, not just the surface part. Then we start it, Mia said. Not a question. Then we start it, Eleanor agreed. Lucas looked at them both. These two women who had decided things between themselves with the efficiency of people who had already figured out the important parts of how they operated together. And he had the expression of a man who understands his role in a particular equation and has made peace with it, even found something like pride in it. Tell me what you need, he said. Not yet, Eleanor said. Let it be an idea for a little while before it becomes a project. She looked at him. Not everything has to move immediately. He took her point. He sat with it and didn't convert it. The three of them stayed at the pool's edge for another hour, the water moving around their feet, the night doing its slow work overhead. Sophie was asleep inside and would wake up tomorrow with opinions about breakfast and the pool and whether a resort could keep a pet, and they would navigate all of that with the particular combination of patience and imperfection that constitutes actual family life, nothing like the brochure, entirely sufficient. The moon made its path on the water, and it still looked solid and still wasn't. Eleanor looked at it and thought about what it meant to be someone whose existence left marks on other people in directions she couldn't trace, through words and presence and the specific ordinary miracle of showing up consistently in rooms where people needed someone to be. She thought about Gerald's biscuits and Cassandra's kitchen paper and Devon's manila envelope and Anna's 2-page letter and all the things that would keep happening after tonight, in all the future tenses she was now inhabiting. She thought about one midnight knock and what it had been worth, and the answer was everything, and the answer had nothing to do with how much it cost to make. The pool light moved, the ocean came in and went back, and the night held all of them in the imperfect, sufficient, human way that good nights do, not solving anything permanently, not promising anything it couldn't keep. Just present, just here, just enough.